My sister told my parents I had dropped out of medical school to hide her own theft, a lie that led to me being disowned and cut off for 6 years. They missed my residency graduation. They missed my wedding. They erased me entirely. Then last month, my sister was rushed to the emergency room with her heart failing. When the head surgeon walked in, my mother gripped my father's arm so tightly it left bruises. She had no idea the doctor she was screaming for was the daughter she threw away. My name is Allison, though my colleagues call me Allie. I am 33 years old and currently the head of cardiothoracic surgery at one of the top hospitals in Chicago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your worth to a family that constantly underestimated you and tossed you aside. The blaring sound of the trauma center alarm cut through the busy emergency department. It was a Tuesday evening, typically chaotic with the usual rush of patients, but the shouting from the ambulance bay instantly drew everyone's attention. Paramedics burst through the automatic double doors, pushing a gurney at a dead sprint. On the stretcher lay a pale, gasping woman clutching her chest, her lips carrying a terrifying blue tint. It was my younger sister, Brittany. She was 30 years old, though she looked entirely gray and fragile in that panicked moment. Right behind the paramedics were two people causing an absolute scene, completely disregarding the life and death situation unfolding around them. My mother, Susan, and my father, Richard. They were practically running over the triage nurses, shoving expensive medical equipment out of the way to keep up with the stretcher. Susan was screaming at the top of her lungs, waving a heavy platinum credit card directly in the face of the emergency room charge nurse. "Money is not an issue," Susan shrieked, her voice echoing harshly off the sterile hospital walls. "Swipe this right now. I demand a private suite. I demand the absolute best doctor in this entire hospital. My daughter is a CEO of a tech startup, and she is not waiting in line with these common people." Richard slammed his fist against the registration desk, knocking over a cup of pens and startling a receptionist. "Do you have any idea who we are?" he demanded, his face red with fury and misplaced arrogance. "This hospital is an absolute joke. Your staff is moving like snails. Get the hospital administrator down here immediately. I will personally sue this entire establishment if you do not get the head of surgery out here right this second to treat my daughter." The charge nurse, a seasoned professional who had dealt with every type of entitled behavior imaginable, stepped firmly in their path to block them from entering the trauma bay. "Sir, ma'am, you need to step back behind the red line right now. Your daughter's blood pressure is crashing rapidly. She has fluid filling the sac around her heart. It is a condition called cardiac tamponade, and it is completely fatal if we do not act within minutes. We are paging the trauma surgeon now. Please step back." "Then page faster," Susan yelled, entirely ignoring the nurse's instructions and attempting to push past her. "I am not letting some inexperienced, overtired resident touch my daughter. We want the head of the department. We want the person in charge. Get them out here right now or I will have your job." I was washing my hands at the scrub sink just down the hall when I heard the unmistakable sound of my mother's screaming. I calmly turned off the water, dried my hands with a sterile towel, slipped on a fresh pair of surgical gloves, and pushed through the swinging double doors into Trauma Bay 1. The bright, blinding surgical lights immediately reflected off the silver name badge securely clipped to my dark blue scrubs. It read, "Dr. Allison Hayes, Head of Cardiothoracic Surgery." I stepped right up to the head of the stretcher, my eyes fixed entirely on the patient monitor glowing above. Brittany's heart rate was skyrocketing to dangerous levels while her blood pressure plummeted. It was a textbook emergency that required total focus. I did not even glance at the two screaming people currently being held back by hospital security near the doorway. "What do we have?" I asked the lead paramedic, my voice projecting clearly over the chaos. He rattled off the vitals, confirming the severe tamponade. I turned to my surgical team, pointing to the necessary trays. "Prep a pericardial window immediately. We need to drain that fluid right now or her heart will stop beating in less than 2 minutes. Get a central line in and push fluids fast." My voice carried the calm, absolute authority of someone who successfully ran the hardest surgical floor in the entire city. At the sound of my voice, the screaming behind me stopped. It did not just quiet down, it ceased completely, leaving a deafening, heavy silence in its wake. I finally turned my head slowly and locked eyes with the exact people who had thrown me out of their house 6 years ago like garbage. Susan was frozen mid-breath. Her hand, still aggressively clutching that platinum credit card, slowly dropped to her side, as if all the strength had vanished from her body. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically from my face to the embroidered title on my scrub top and back to my face again. Richard looked as if the tile floor had just vanished beneath his expensive shoes. All the arrogance, the shouting, and the deep entitlement drained from his posture in a fraction of a second. "You," Susan whispered, her voice shaking and barely audible over the rhythmic, rapid beeping of the heart monitor. She gripped Richard's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned bone white. "What are you doing here? Get away from her." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of emotion. I looked at the woman who had birthed me with the exact same detached, calculating professionalism I used for complete strangers. "I am doing my job," I stated coldly, holding her gaze. "I am the head of this entire surgical department. You stood in my hallway and demanded the best surgeon in Chicago to save your daughter's life. Here I am. Now you can either step outside and let me work, or you can stay here and watch her heart stop. The choice is yours." Richard tried to find his voice, sputtering and pointing a shaking finger at me, while his face turned an unhealthy shade of purple. "This is a mistake. You are a dropout. You are a failure. You do not belong in a hospital. We are getting a different doctor right now." I stepped closer to the foot of the bed, my gaze stripping him of every ounce of power and control he thought he held in this building. "There is no other doctor," I replied, my tone cutting through the tense air like a surgical blade. "Every single surgeon on this floor answers directly to me. I am the only person standing between Brittany and the morgue right now. Security, escort them to the waiting room immediately." As the guards gently but firmly grabbed their arms to guide them out of the trauma bay, Susan kept looking back at me, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The reality was violently crashing down on their perfect illusions. The daughter they had proudly branded a failure, the one they had eagerly erased from their perfect family portrait, was now the absolute authority in the room, holding their golden child's life entirely in her hands. I turned my back on them before they even cleared the doorway, picking up a scalpel from the tray to begin the procedure. The painful past did not matter right now. Only the cold, hard reality of the operating table mattered. The security guards moved forward, their hands extended to grasp my parents by the shoulders, but Susan violently yanked her arm free. She lunged back toward the foot of the stretcher, her expensive designer handbag slipping off her shoulder and crashing onto the sterile linoleum floor. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure denial and absolute rage. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest. "You cannot touch her!" Susan screamed, her voice cracking under the intense strain. "You are a drug addict. You were expelled from medical school 6 years ago. You steal things. You do drugs. You are a complete disgrace to this family, and I will not let a junkie lay a single finger on my daughter." I did not flinch. I did not raise my head to acknowledge her outburst. My hands remained perfectly steady as I reached into my scrub pocket and pulled out a small medical penlight. I leaned over Brittany, peeling back her eyelids one by one. I clicked the penlight on, passing the bright beam across her dilated pupils. "Pupils are sluggish," I announced clearly to the room, entirely ignoring my mother. "Vitals are still tanking. Hand me the ultrasound probe and prep the long needle for a pericardiocentesis. I need to relieve the pressure on her heart right this second, before she completely codes." Only then did I shift my gaze. I looked up from my dying sister and locked my eyes directly onto Susan. My voice dropped to a cold, clinical register that cut right through the chaotic noise of the trauma bay. "An expelled drug addict," I repeated slowly, letting the sheer absurdity of her words hang in the heavy air. "That is a truly fascinating diagnosis, Susan. Is that why you completely ignored my phone calls when I graduated at the top of my surgical residency program? Did Brittany tell you that? Did she look you right in the eyes and spin a tragic little story about me shooting up in a filthy alleyway? Richard stepped forward, positioning himself protectively in front of his wife. His face was red with furious indignation. Do not speak to your mother with that disrespectful tone, he barked. We know the absolute truth. Brittany told us everything when we found out you dropped out of your classes. We know you drained your own bank accounts to fund your disgusting habits. You chose a life in the gutter. I grabbed the ultrasound probe from the attending nurse, pressing it firmly against Brittany's pale chest. The black and white image on the monitor instantly confirmed my worst fears. A massive dark pool of fluid was suffocating her heart muscle. I never touched a single drug in my entire life, I stated sharply, keeping my eyes glued to the ultrasound screen. 6 years ago, I was working 3 consecutive night shifts, cleaning bedpans at the university hospital just to afford my textbooks. But I suppose it was so much easier to believe your precious golden child when she handed you that completely fabricated story. It gave you the perfect guilt-free excuse to empty my entire college savings account and hand it straight over to her, did it not? Susan gasped loudly, placing a hand over her chest, as if I had physically struck her. She needed that money for her company, Susan cried out defensively. She was building a massive technology startup. She was going to be a CEO. You were already throwing your life away on drugs. We simply reallocated the funds to the daughter who actually had a promising future. I snatched a large syringe from the sterile tray. I did not hesitate. I plunged the needle precisely into Brittany's chest, watching the ultrasound monitor closely as the tip guided its way directly into the pericardial sac. Dark, thick blood immediately filled the syringe. I began drawing the fluid out, relieving the deadly pressure strangling her heart. I was graduating at the top of my medical class. I shot back, my voice dripping with pure venom as I pulled back the plunger. I called you on match day. I called you on my graduation day. You blocked my phone number because Brittany convinced you I was only calling to beg for rehab money. Meanwhile, she took my tuition fund, bought designer clothes, and went on luxury vacations. I took out $300,000 in federal student loans to pay my own way through medical school so I could stand in this exact spot today. The heart monitor suddenly shifted its rhythm. The frantic, erratic beeping smoothed out into a steady, strong pulse. The color began to slowly return to Brittany's gray face as her heart finally had the space to beat properly again. I handed the blood-filled syringe to a nurse and began securing the drainage catheter. So yes, I continued glaring at my parents, who were now staring in horrified silence at the medical miracle I had just performed. Keep screaming about your highly successful CEO daughter while she lies here dying from a cardiac condition she probably ignored because she was too busy faking a luxury lifestyle on the internet. Richard shook his head stubbornly, refusing to let his perfect reality crumble. You are lying, he insisted, though his voice lacked its previous booming confidence. Brittany is a massive success. You are just jealous. You are a bitter, jealous liar trying to extort us for money. I snapped off my bloody surgical gloves and tossed them into the hazardous waste bin. If I wanted her dead, or if I wanted your money, I would just step back, fold my arms, and let you two keep talking while she flatlined on this table, I said coldly. Guards, remove them from my trauma bay permanently. If they resist or cause another scene, call the police and have them arrested for actively interfering with life-saving medical treatment. This time, the security guards did not hold back. They grabbed Richard and Susan firmly by the arms and physically dragged them backward toward the automatic doors. Susan kicked and screamed, demanding to speak to the hospital board, demanding that I be fired and arrested, but her threats meant absolutely nothing here. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off their furious shouting and leaving the trauma bay in a state of controlled, professional quiet. I let out a long, slow breath, looking down at the sister who had happily destroyed my life to fund her shopping habits. I had stabilized her heart, but she was far from safe. We needed to move her to a formal operating room immediately to repair the underlying tear. Just as I turned to instruct the anesthesiologist to prep her for transport, the trauma bay doors violently burst open once again. A tall, broad-shouldered black man rushed into the room, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. It was Malik Jenkins, Brittany's husband. He was a brilliant software architect, a man who worked 80 hours a week to provide for his wife, and a man who had been fed the exact same toxic lies as my parents. Malik stopped dead in his tracks the moment his eyes landed on me. His face twisted into a mask of pure disgust and deep contempt. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Malik demanded, his voice echoing loudly across the room. "Are you here to steal from her hospital room? Get out of here before I call the cops. Are you seriously trying to beg for funeral money while she is dying?" Malik took a threatening step forward, his fists clenched tight at his sides. He looked exhausted, the dark bags under his eyes telling the story of a man who worked day and night to fund his wife's fictional empire. Brittany had clearly painted a horrifying picture of me for him. In his mind, I was a dangerous, desperate criminal who had been kicked out of the family for draining their bank accounts. He honestly believed I had sneaked into the trauma bay to scavenge for loose cash or steal her belongings. I did not back away. I did not even blink. I turned my attention back to the trauma nurse standing beside the bed. "Prep operating room 4 immediately," I commanded, my voice projecting crisp and clear. "Call the blood bank and have 4 units of O-negative blood rushed up. Page the on-call anesthesiologist and tell him I need him scrubbed and ready in 2 minutes. We are moving her right now." Malik reached out, attempting to grab my shoulder to physically stop me from touching his wife. "Do not ignore me!" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic and misplaced anger. "I know exactly who you are, Allison. Brittany told me everything. You stole her college fund. You ruined your own life. I am calling hospital security to have you thrown out on the street." Before his hand could even make contact with my scrub top, 2 large male trauma nurses stepped squarely between us, creating an impenetrable wall of blue uniforms. "Sir, you need to step back from Dr. Hayes immediately," the taller nurse warned, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "If you interfere with the head of surgery during a critical code, you will be escorted out in handcuffs." Malik froze. His arm dropped slowly to his side. The words seemed to hit an invisible brick wall in his brain. "Dr. Hayes," he repeated dumbly, his eyes darting frantically between the stern faces of the nursing staff and my own calm expression. "No, that is impossible. Her name is Allison Thorne. She is a college dropout. She is a drug addict. She does not even have a job." I stepped around the nurses, closing the distance between Malik and myself. I looked up into his panicked, confused eyes. "My name is Dr. Allison Hayes," I stated, enunciating every single syllable with icy precision. "I am the chief of cardiothoracic surgery at this hospital. I paid my own way through medical school, while your wife used my stolen tuition money to buy designer bags and pretend to be a technology CEO. And right now, I am the only human being in this entire city capable of repairing the massive tear in her aorta before she bleeds to death internally." Malik stared at the silver badge clipped to my chest. He read the credentials. He saw the hospital logo. I could practically see the gears in his head violently grinding to a halt, as the reality of my existence completely shattered the elaborate web of lies Brittany had spun for the past 6 years. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a ragged, breathless sound came out. The cognitive dissonance was physically paralyzing him. I did not have the luxury of waiting for him to process his wife's sociopathic behavior. Every passing second was a drop of blood Brittany could not afford to lose. I snatched a heavy metal clipboard from the foot of the stretcher. Clipped to it was the standard emergency surgical consent form. I shoved the clipboard hard against Malik's chest, forcing him to grab it to keep it from falling. "I do not have the time or the patience to undo 6 years of your wife's psychotic lies right now," I told him, my voice devoid of any warmth or familial affection. "Her heart is drowning in its own blood." "You have exactly 30 seconds to sign this surgical consent form on the dotted line." If you do not sign it, I will step away from this table and you can spend the rest of your evening picking out a coffin for your wife." Malik looked down at the paper. His hands were shaking so violently the clipboard rattled against his jacket. He looked at Brittany, whose skin was still terrifyingly pale, despite the temporary relief from the fluid drain. He looked back at me, searching my face for any sign of a bluff. He found nothing but cold, clinical determination. 20 seconds, I announced loudly. Her systolic pressure is dropping again. Do you want her to die on this table while you try to figure out why she lied to you about my entire existence? Malik let out a choked sob. He grabbed the pen attached to the clipboard and hastily scribbled his signature across the bottom line, nearly tearing the paper in his frantic rush. He shoved the clipboard back into my hands, stepping away from the stretcher as if it were on fire. "Please," he begged, his voice entirely stripped of its previous hostility, replaced only with raw, desperate terror. "Please save her. Just save her." I handed the clipboard to the charge nurse without breaking eye contact with Malik. "I will do my job," I said coldly, "but you should probably start preparing yourself for the hospital bill, because saving a life is incredibly expensive, and I highly doubt her imaginary technology startup is going to cover the cost." I turned my back on him and signaled the team. "Let us move," I shouted. The entire trauma team sprang into synchronized action. The brakes on the gurney were released with a loud clack. Nurses and technicians surrounded the bed, pushing Brittany out of the trauma bay and down the brightly lit corridor toward the surgical wing at a dead sprint. I jogged alongside the head of the bed, barking final orders to the respiratory therapist to ensure her airway remained clear. Malik was left standing completely alone in the center of the empty trauma bay. The bloody, discarded gloves, the torn medical wrappers, and the lingering smell of antiseptic were the only proof that his wife had been there at all. He stood frozen, staring at the swinging double doors we had just vanished through. The foundation of his marriage, his finances, and his trust in his wife had just suffered a catastrophic earthquake, and the real tremors had not even started yet. He slowly turned and walked out of the emergency room, dragging his feet toward the surgical waiting area, entirely unaware that the hospital billing department was already waiting for him at the front desk, with a revelation that would destroy his life even further. Malik wandered down the harsh fluorescent corridor, toward the surgical waiting room, his mind completely blank. The adrenaline from the trauma bay was rapidly draining from his system, leaving behind a cold, heavy dread. His wife was currently having her chest opened by a woman she claimed was a drug-addicted thief, a woman who was actually the chief of surgery. He could not reconcile the two realities. His thoughts were violently interrupted when a woman behind a thick glass partition cleared her throat loudly. "Excuse me, Mr. Jenkins," the billing specialist called out, tapping a manicured fingernail against her keyboard. "We need to process the initial admission paperwork for your wife. I need your photo identification and her current health insurance card right away." Malik blinked, shaking his head to clear the fog. "Right, of course," he mumbled, patting his jacket pockets. He pulled out his leather wallet and extracted a stiff plastic insurance card, sliding it through the small opening in the glass. "Brittany handles all of our premium policies through her startup. It is top-tier coverage." The billing clerk took the card without a word, her eyes fixed on the dual monitors in front of her. The rapid clacking of her keyboard echoed in the otherwise quiet reception area. Malik let out a long breath, rubbing his temples. He just needed to sit down. He needed to call his own mother. He needed to wake up from this nightmare. "Sir," the clerk said, her voice dropping an octave into a tone of practiced professional pity. "This policy number is returning an invalid status." Malik frowned, stepping closer to the glass. "Invalid? That is impossible. Try running it again. You probably typed a digit wrong." "I ran it twice, Mr. Jenkins," she replied smoothly, turning one of her monitors slightly so he could see the glaring red text across the screen. "I also pinged the national database directly. This policy was completely terminated 8 months ago due to severe non-payment. Your wife currently has absolutely zero health insurance coverage on file." Malik felt the floor drop out from underneath him for the second time that night. He grabbed the ledge of the counter, his knuckles turning white. "No, you are making a mistake," he insisted, his voice rising in panic. "My wife transfers $800 out of our joint checking account on the first of every single month specifically for this premium policy. I have the receipts right here." He frantically yanked his phone from his pocket, his thumb slipping twice before his facial recognition unlocked the screen. He opened his mobile banking application, aggressively scrolling down to the transaction history. He slammed the phone against the glass partition. "Look right there. $800 transferred to an external account labeled Blue Shield Premium. She does it every month." The clerk barely glanced at the screen before giving him a look of profound sympathy. "Sir, anyone can type whatever they want into the memo line of a bank transfer. That does not mean the money actually went to an insurance provider. Our system shows the provider canceled her coverage entirely 240 days ago. If she was moving that money, it was not going to her health insurance." A cold, paralyzing realization began to spread through Malik's veins. $800 a month. 8 months. $6,400 completely vanished into thin air. If it was not paying for the insurance policy that was supposed to protect them from bankruptcy, where did it go? He scrolled further back in his banking app, his heart hammering against his ribs. He started noticing other strange transfers. $2,000 here, $1,500 there, all labeled as startup expenses or vendor payments. Before Malik could even begin to process the massive financial betrayal staring him in the face, heavy footsteps stormed down the hallway. Richard and Susan marched toward the billing desk, their faces red with fury after being physically thrown out of the trauma bay by hospital security. "There you are," Susan shrieked, pointing an accusing finger at Malik as she closed the distance between them. "You just stood there and let that psychotic woman throw us out. You let that junkie put her filthy hands on my daughter. You are her husband. You are supposed to protect her." Malik slowly turned his head away from the billing counter to look at his mother-in-law. The sheer volume of lies he had been fed was suddenly making him physically nauseous. "Protect her." Malik echoed, his voice dangerously low. "Do you want to know what I actually need to protect her from, Susan?" "I need to protect her from the billing department." Richard scoffed, straightening his expensive suit jacket. "Do not be ridiculous, Malik. Brittany is a highly successful chief executive officer. She has platinum-tier health insurance. This hospital should be rolling out the red carpet for us, not treating us like common criminals." "She has nothing," Malik roared, finally losing his grip on his temper. The booming sound of his voice made both Richard and Susan flinch backward. He shoved his phone directly into Richard's face. "Look at this. The hospital just ran her insurance card. It was canceled 8 months ago for non-payment. My wife has been lying to my face. She has been draining $800 a month from my paycheck, claiming it was for medical coverage and pocketing the cash." Susan gasped, her hand flying to her chest in her signature dramatic fashion. "How dare you accuse my daughter of stealing from you? She is fighting for her life in an operating room right now, and you are standing here obsessing over a few $100s. You are a cheap, pathetic excuse for a man." "A few $100s?" Malik laughed, a harsh, humorless sound that bordered on hysterical. "We are talking about thousands of dollars, Susan. And that is just what I found in the last 2 minutes. I work 80 hours a week writing code to support her imaginary business empire. I pay the mortgage, I pay the car loans, I pay for her luxury gym memberships because she told me her startup capital was tied up in investments. And now I find out she canceled her own life-saving medical insurance just to steal more money from me." Susan stepped right into Malik's personal space, her eyes blazing with irrational, blind defense of her golden child. "Brittany is building a global brand," she spat viciously. "She has massive overhead costs. She probably just switched insurance providers and forgot to update her silly little husband because she is too busy running a real company. You have never supported her vision. You have always been jealous of her potential. If you were a real provider, she would not have to stress over petty administrative bills." Malik stared at her, utterly disgusted by her delusional gymnastics. "Jealous of her potential. Your daughter is a fraud, The doctor currently saving her life just proved it to all of us. She lied about her sister being a drug addict. She lied about where her tuition money went. And now I am finding out she lied about our entire financial existence. Richard forcefully pushed his way between his wife and his son-in-law. That is enough. Richard barked, puffing out his chest to assert dominance. You are acting like a hysterical child, Malik. Brittany is a brilliant entrepreneur. If there is an issue with the insurance, it is a simple clerical error. I will not stand here and listen to you slander my daughter's pristine reputation in the middle of a public hallway. Malik shook his head slowly, a bitter smile creeping across his face as he looked at the two people who had enabled a monster. You two are completely blind, he said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You built a pedestal for a liar, and now the entire thing is collapsing. She does not have a company. She does not have insurance. And in about 10 minutes, this hospital is going to demand a deposit we cannot pay. Richard let out a loud, arrogant scoff, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a sleek, heavy black credit card and held it up between two fingers like a weapon. We do not need your meager paycheck, Malik. I am a successful man who actually knows how to take care of his family. I will handle this massive inconvenience myself, since you are clearly too weak to manage your own household. Richard turned his back on Malik and marched directly up to the billing clerk's window, slamming the heavy black card onto the counter. Process the deposit for my daughter's surgery immediately, he ordered the clerk, his voice dripping with condescension. And make sure you charge enough to cover a private recovery suite. We are done dealing with amateurs today. Malik simply crossed his arms and watched the burning anger in his chest slowly being replaced by a cold, calculating anticipation. He knew exactly what Brittany had been doing with the money now, and he had a very strong suspicion that his father-in-law was about to face a brutal financial reality of his own. The billing clerk picked up Richard's black card with complete indifference. She did not care about his suit or his attitude. She only cared about the magnetic stripe on the back. She swiped it through her terminal. The machine beeped a sharp, unpleasant electronic sound. Susan leaned against the counter, glaring back at Malik with a triumphant smirk. You see, Malik, this is what real wealth looks like. This is what a supportive family does. When Brittany wakes up, I am going to tell her exactly how quickly you turned your back on her over a simple banking error. You do not deserve a woman of her caliber. Malik did not retreat. Did not. He pulled out his phone again, diving deeper into the joint bank statements. The more he scrolled, the more the sickening truth materialized. The charges were not just vague startup expenses anymore. He started seeing specific vendor names, high-end boutiques, luxury travel agencies, fine dining restaurants in cities she claimed she was visiting for investor pitches. She was not pitching investors. She was funding a lavish lifestyle on his dime and hiding it behind the facade of a struggling entrepreneur. You are right, Susan, Malik said, never taking his eyes off the glaring financial evidence on his screen. I definitely do not deserve her. Because nobody deserves to be bled dry by a parasite. I hope your husband's credit limit is as high as his ego, because repairing a torn aorta costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. And my bank accounts are officially closed to her as of right now. Susan opened her mouth to scream another insult at him, but the billing clerk interrupted the escalating argument. Sir, the clerk said, looking directly at Richard with a flat, unimpressed expression. The machine is declining the transaction. Richard scoffed loudly, aggressively, snatching the heavy metal card back from the billing clerk. He wiped the magnetic stripe against the lapel of his tailored suit and tossed it back onto the counter. Your terminal is obviously broken. He barked, his face turning a blotchy shade of crimson. That is an exclusive platinum account with a credit limit higher than your annual salary. Run it again and stop wasting my time. My daughter is a chief executive officer currently being operated on, and I will not stand here and be humiliated by faulty hospital equipment. The clerk did not even blink. She picked up the card, swiped it through the reader a second time, and turned the monitor slightly so Richard could see the glaring red text flashing across the screen. Sir, my terminal is functioning perfectly, she stated with practiced, icy professionalism. The hospital system requires an immediate deposit of $75,000 to secure the operating room, the anesthesiologist, and the surgical intensive care unit for an uninsured emergency thoracic procedure. Your card issuer has placed a hard lock on this account. It is showing a status of insufficient funds and has been flagged by the fraud department for excessive overdrafts. $75,000. Susan shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly down the sterile hallway. She clutched her pearl necklace, her eyes wide with indignation. That is absolute extortion. We are not paying that much up front. Just run another card, Richard. Show this incompetent woman how real wealth works. Richard yanked his leather wallet open, his fingers suddenly trembling as the first wave of genuine panic began to crack his arrogant facade. He pulled out a gold corporate card and slammed it onto the counter. "Use this one," he ordered, his voice losing its booming authority. The clerk swiped it. The machine emitted the same sharp, unpleasant beep. "Declined," she said flatly. Richard swallowed hard, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He dug into the wallet again, extracting a blue travel rewards card. "Try this. It has no preset spending limit." The clerk swiped it. "Beep?" "Declined," she repeated, not breaking eye contact. "Impossible!" Richard stammered frantically, tearing through the remaining plastic cards in his wallet. "There has to be a bank error. Our accounts are bulletproof. We just transferred funds last week." He pulled out a joint credit card, the one he shared with Susan for household expenses, and shoved it through the glass partition. "Run it. Run it right now." The clerk swiped the fourth card. "Beep. I am sorry, sir, but every single card you have handed me is completely maxed out and locked," she informed him, her tone carrying zero sympathy. "Unless you can provide a valid form of payment or a certified bank check for $75,000 in the next 5 minutes, hospital administration will halt all non-life-saving procedures and transfer her to a county facility the moment she is stabilized." Malik stood a few feet away, watching the horrific scene unfold. He looked down at his phone, staring at the empty joint checking account his wife had systematically drained. "They are not bank errors," Richard, Malik said, his voice completely hollow. "She drained you too." Before Richard could turn around to yell at his son-in-law, the heavy double doors leading to the surgical wing pushed open. I stepped out into the hallway. I had exactly 3 minutes before I needed to scrub in and open Brittany's chest cavity. I stood there in my dark blue scrubs, my arms crossed firmly over my chest, watching the pathetic financial meltdown happening at the billing desk. "Having a little trouble settling the bill?" "Richard," I asked, my voice slicing through the tense air like a surgical scalpel. Susan whipped her head around, her eyes blazing with irrational hatred. "You did this!" she screamed, taking a threatening step toward me. "You hacked our accounts. You stole our money out of spite. Because you are a jealous, miserable failure, I am going to have you thrown in federal prison." I let out a short, cold laugh that stopped her dead in her tracks. "I have been in an operating room saving lives for the past 14 hours, Susan. I do not need to hack your bank accounts to steal your money. Your precious golden child did that all by herself." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, commanding the entire hallway. "Where exactly is that $500,000 retirement fund you two so generously handed over to Brittany to start her revolutionary tech company 6 years ago?" I asked, tilting my head mockingly. "You remember that money, do you not? The exact same life savings you blatantly refused to co-sign for my medical school loans because you said a junkie would just waste it. Where is that massive return on investment she promised you?" Richard visibly flinched. He gripped the edge of the billing counter to keep his balance. "Brittany invested that capital into secure server infrastructure and overseas software developers," he argued weakly, desperately clinging to the illusion. "She is on the verge of an initial public offering." "Server infrastructure," I repeated, raising an eyebrow in pure disbelief. "Is that what they are calling VIP spa memberships and luxury ski resorts in Aspen these days?" Because last month, while I was attending a national cardiology conference at the St. Regis Hotel, I personally saw your highly successful CEO daughter swiping your joint credit card to pay for a $10,000 champagne facial and a private snowboarding instructor. The color literally drained from Richard and Susan's faces. The healthy, arrogant flush of their cheeks vanished in a single second, leaving them looking like hollowed-out ghosts. The horrific, undeniable math finally clicked in their heads. The missed phone calls from the bank. The letters from creditors they thought were junk mail. The constant urgent requests for short-term loans from Brittany to cover what she called temporary cash flow issues. They had given her everything. They had remortgaged their house. They had emptied their retirement accounts. They had handed their entire financial future over to a sociopathic liar who had burned it all on designer clothes and luxury vacations. "You threw me away to the streets to fund a scam artist," I stated brutally, my eyes locking onto my parents' terrified, pale faces. "You let her convince you I was a drug addict so she could steal the money you had saved for my education. And you were so blinded by your own arrogance and favoritism that you handed her the keys to your entire life." I turned around, pushing the heavy surgical doors open with my back. "I am going into that operating room right now to piece her shredded heart back together because it is my job," I said over my shoulder, not looking back at them. "But you had better figure out how to pay this hospital before she wakes up. Because my personal surgical fee is not included in that $75,000 deposit. And I absolutely do not offer family discounts to people who treat me like garbage." The heavy surgical doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the pathetic sounds of my parents' financial panic. I power-walked directly to the scrub sink, pressing my knee against the metal lever to start the steaming hot water. I pumped harsh iodine soap onto my sponge and began scrubbing my hands and forearms with aggressive precision. I forced every ounce of personal rage out of my mind. The woman lying on the operating table in room 4 was no longer the sister who had maliciously destroyed my early 20s. She was simply a failing biological machine that required immediate mechanical repair. Just as I rinsed the dark orange soap from my skin, the overhead public address system violently crackled to life. "Code Blue Operating Room 4. Code Blue Operating Room 4. I slammed the water off and sprinted through the automatic doors, pushing my wet arms into the sterile gown held up by a waiting nurse. Another nurse snapped my latex gloves into place before I even reached the operating table. The heart monitor was emitting a solid, high-pitched tone that signaled absolute disaster. Brittany had flatlined. Her heart had completely given out under the massive trauma of the aortic tear. "Start compressions right now," I commanded, my voice echoing with pure authority over the chaotic noise of the surgical team. "Charge the paddles to 200, clear." The heavy shock jolted her lifeless body upward, but the monitor remained a flat, lifeless line. The damage was too extensive for a simple electric shock to fix. Her chest cavity was filling with blood faster than her failing heart could pump it out. "Scalpel," I barked, holding my right hand out. The surgical nurse slapped the cold steel instrument firmly into my palm. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I pressed the blade firmly against the center of Brittany's chest and made a single swift vertical incision right down her sternum. "Hand me the sternal saw and get the cardiopulmonary bypass machine primed and ready to take over her circulation." The shrill mechanical whine of the bone saw filled the brightly lit room as I cracked her ribcage open, exposing the catastrophic internal bleeding. Dark crimson blood pooled heavily, obscuring the source of the rupture. "Suction on maximum," I ordered, plunging my gloved hands directly into the chest cavity. I navigated entirely by touch, and years of grueling surgical experience feeling for the distinct, jagged edge of the torn aorta. While I was up to my wrists in blood fighting a desperate physical battle against the clock, a completely different kind of dissection was happening out in the sterile surgical waiting room. Malik sat heavily onto a hard plastic chair, entirely ignoring the chaotic shouting match happening between Richard and Susan and the hospital security guards near the billing desk. His hands were trembling, but his mind was rapidly shifting into a state of hyper-focused analytical clarity. He was a senior software architect who spent his days building impenetrable digital fortresses for massive corporations. If his wife had been hiding a secret financial life from him, he possessed the exact technical skill set required to tear down every single digital wall she had built. He unzipped his backpack and pulled out his high-performance laptop, resting it on his knees. He flipped the screen open and let his fingers hover over the keyboard. He knew Brittany was notoriously lazy with her digital security. She reused variations of their wedding date and her own birthday for almost everything. He bypassed the initial lock screen on her synchronized cloud account within 2 minutes, exploiting a shared network vulnerability he had set up for their home smart devices. Once inside her primary email server, he ran a rapid search query, isolating all financial documents, bank statements, and loan applications dating back 6 years. He bypassed her two-factor authentication by routing the confirmation codes directly to his own synchronized device. The sheer volume of hidden folders he uncovered made his stomach violently churn. He opened a folder labeled Startup Capital. It contained the original wire transfer receipts from Richard and Susan's retirement accounts. The total amount was exactly $500,000, but the money had never been deposited into a business account. Malik traced the routing numbers and discovered the funds had been funneled directly into a private offshore wealth management account entirely under Brittany's name. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the transaction history for that specific hidden account. He watched the massive $500,000 fund systematically drain away over the course of 6 years. There were zero business expenses. There was no payroll. There was no server infrastructure. There were only endless pages of staggering personal indulgence. $50,000 spent at a luxury car dealership for a vehicle she claimed her company had leased for her. $80,000 dropped on private villa rentals in Bora Bora and St. Bart's, while she told Malik she was attending high-level investor conferences. He dug deeper, opening a subfolder filled with credit card statements. His breath hitched in his throat. She had secretly opened 4 different high-limit credit cards, using his social security number and his excellent credit score as the primary guarantor. The balances were completely maxed out. She had racked up over $120,000 in hidden debt, meticulously altering the digital billing addresses to a private post office box so he would never see the physical mail. The silence in Malik's mind was deafening. The loud, frantic arguing of his in-laws across the waiting room faded into complete white noise. He stared at the glowing screen, realizing he was not just married to a liar. He was legally tied to a financial predator who had systematically ruined his credit, stolen his future, and bankrupted her own parents just to maintain a fake glamorous aesthetic on social media. Back inside Operating Room 4, the tension was suffocating. I had successfully clamped the ruptured aorta, halting the massive hemorrhage that was seconds away from ending her life. I worked with mechanical precision, my hands moving in a blur of focused expertise as I began suturing the synthetic graft into place. The cardiopulmonary bypass machine hummed steadily, doing the work of the heart and lungs I had temporarily stopped. "Clamp off," I instructed, stepping back slightly as the perfusionist slowly restored the blood flow to Brittany's newly repaired heart. I stared at the monitor, watching the jagged lines intensely. "Come on," I muttered under my breath. "Beat." The muscle twitched once, then twice. Slowly, a jagged, uneven rhythm appeared on the screen before smoothing out into a strong, steady sinus rhythm. The flat line was gone. Her blood pressure began to climb back into a survivable range. I let out a slow, controlled exhale, dropping my bloody instruments onto the surgical tray. I had just pulled my sister back from the absolute brink of death. I saved the life of the woman who had happily destroyed mine. But as I watched her chest rise and fall with the mechanical ventilator, I felt absolutely no warmth or sisterly relief. I only felt the cold satisfaction of doing my job flawlessly. She was going to survive this surgery, but she was about to wake up to a reality far more brutal than death. The surgical waiting room was a hostile environment of frantic whispers and aggressive pacing. Richard stood at the billing counter completely red in the face, aggressively tapping his finger against the reinforced glass. He was demanding that the hospital administrator override the system and accept a personal check he had absolutely no funds to back up. Susan was putting on a theatrical performance of a distressed wealthy mother, sobbing loudly into a designer tissue and glaring at the nurses who dared to walk past her without offering comfort. In the far corner, Malik remained entirely silent, his eyes locked onto his laptop screen as he continued downloading every single piece of fraudulent financial history his wife had desperately tried to hide. He was no longer part of their family unit. He was just a man collecting evidence for his own survival. The heavy frosted glass doors leading to the hospital executive wing slid open with a quiet hiss. The chaotic energy in the reception area immediately shifted. A tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit walked into the waiting room. He carried a thick, leather-bound legal folder under his arm. His posture was commanding, and every hospital employee he passed immediately stood a little straighter. This was Liam Hayes, the chief legal officer of the hospital, and he possessed an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority. Liam bypassed the security guards and stepped directly up to the billing counter. He gestured for the stressed administrator to step away. The administrator looked relieved and quickly retreated to the back office. Liam turned his sharp, unyielding gaze onto Richard and Susan. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." Liam stated, his voice a smooth, calculated baritone that carried no warmth whatsoever. "I am Liam Hayes, the chief legal officer for this medical institution. I have been briefed on your rather loud disruptions in our trauma bay and your current inability to secure the required financial deposit for the emergency thoracic surgery currently taking place." Richard puffed out his chest, attempting to regain his lost dominance in the presence of another alpha male. "Listen here, Mr. Hayes," Richard barked, adjusting his silk tie. "We are dealing with a ridiculous clerical error from our banking institution. We are a prominent family. My daughter is a highly successful executive. You have absolutely no right to hold a life-saving procedure hostage over a temporary administrative glitch. I expect the hospital to waive these upfront fees immediately out of professional courtesy." Liam did not even blink. He opened the leather folder and pulled out a crisp single sheet of paper, laying it flat on the counter. "There is no clerical error, Richard," Liam replied, his tone razor-thin and completely factual. "The financial algorithms our billing department ran on your accounts returned hard fraud locks and massive negative balances. You do not have the liquidity to pay for a cup of coffee in our cafeteria, let alone a surgical procedure that is currently racking up costs at a rate of $2,000 a minute." Susan slammed her hands on the counter, her face twisting in pure outrage. "How dare you speak to us like that?" she shrieked. "My daughter is performing that surgery right now. Dr. Allison Thorne is my flesh and blood. She is the head of surgery. We are her parents. You owe us the utmost respect and a full family discount. We will not pay a single dime for this hospital stay." Liam looked at Susan with an expression of profound, chilling pity. He closed the folder with a deliberate, heavy snap. "First of all, her name is Dr. Allison Hayes." Liam corrected her, his voice dropping into a register that made the air in the room feel instantly colder. She dropped the name Thorne the day she realized the people who gave it to her were toxic, manipulative parasites. "And second of all, she is my wife." The word hit the waiting room like a physical shockwave. Richard stumbled backward a full step, his mouth dropping open. Susan froze completely, her eyes darting from Liam's perfectly groomed appearance to the heavy platinum wedding band resting on his left hand. The arrogant, screaming mother vanished in a fraction of a second. Her brain violently rebooted as she tried to process this entirely new reality. The daughter she had spent 6 years telling everyone was a homeless, drug-addicted dropout was not just the top surgeon in the city. She was married to the wealthy, powerful chief legal officer standing right in front of her. A terrifying, rapid transformation took over Susan's face. The harsh, angry lines melted away. She forced a bright, watery smile onto her lips, her eyes suddenly brimming with large, theatrical tears. She stepped away from the counter and moved toward Liam with her arms outstretched, completely abandoning her previous hostility. "Oh my goodness!" Susan gasped, her voice trembling with fake emotion. "Liam, our son-in-law, we had absolutely no idea. Allison has always been so secretive, so independent. It has broken our hearts not knowing where she was all these years. We have missed her so terribly. Come here, let me give you a hug. We are finally a family again." She reached out to wrap her arms around his shoulders, fully intending to use this newfound connection to erase her financial nightmare. She was ready to play the role of the loving, relieved mother who just wanted her family reunited. Liam did not step back. He simply raised his left hand, placing his palm flat in the air between them, stopping her forward momentum with a gesture so cold and absolute it made Susan gasp. "Do not touch me," Liam ordered, his voice devoid of any human empathy. "Do not ever attempt to touch me, and do not ever refer to yourself as my family." Susan lowered her arms, her fake smile trembling as she tried to maintain the victim act. "Liam, please," she whined, forcing a sob. "We are just desperate parents. Brittany is dying. We are going through a terrible, unexpected financial hardship right now. Surely you and Allie can help us out. You run the legal department. You can make this entire hospital bill disappear. We are family. Family takes care of each other in times of crisis." Liam stared down at her, completely unfazed by the crocodile tears streaming down her face. "You do not get to invoke the word family when it is financially convenient for you, Susan. Where was this desperate, loving family dynamic 6 years ago when my wife was sleeping on the cold floor of the university library because you threw her out on the street? Where was this maternal love when you ignored her wedding invitation? You did not come to support her because Brittany told you Allie was in a rehabilitation center, and you did not even care enough to verify if your own child was dead or alive." Richard stepped in, his voice losing all of its previous bravado. "We were lied to," Richard pleaded, holding his hands up defensively. "We made a terrible mistake. But we are here now. We are broke, Liam. We have absolutely nothing left. If the hospital demands payment for this surgery, we will be completely ruined. You have to show us some mercy. Mercy is a privilege reserved for people who show remorse." Liam stated, his eyes locking onto Richard like a predator watching its prey. "You are not sorry for what you did to my wife. You are only sorry that your golden child drained your bank accounts and you got caught holding the empty bag. I am not here as your son-in-law. I am here as the legal representative of this hospital, and I am officially informing you that we do not offer charity to people who finance their luxury vacations by stealing their daughter's college tuition." Liam turned his head slightly, acknowledging Malik, who was still sitting in the corner, absorbing every single word of the confrontation. The digital evidence of Brittany's fraud was glowing brightly on the laptop screen, a silent testament to the absolute destruction of the Thorne family legacy. Liam knew exactly what was on that screen, and he was fully prepared to use it to ensure Richard and Susan paid for every single sin they had committed. Richard straightened his posture frantically, trying to muster whatever pathetic scraps of authority he still possessed. He looked at Liam, attempting a conspiratorial man-to-man smile that fell completely flat in the sterile lighting of the surgical waiting room. "Listen to me, Liam. I understand you are upset. Emotions are running incredibly high right now. But let us be pragmatic about this situation. You are the chief legal officer of this prestigious hospital. You have the ultimate executive discretionary power to waive these exorbitant emergency fees. Brittany is your sister-in-law. We are your family. Family protects each other from ridiculous bureaucratic nonsense." Susan nodded her head vigorously, stepping closer, but smartly keeping her hands to herself, after Liam had explicitly warned her not to touch him. "Exactly," she chimed in, her voice dripping with a sickeningly sweet desperation. "We are all one big family now. Whatever minor misunderstandings happened in the past can easily be swept under the rug. You have the absolute authority to stamp a zero balance on her account. Just make this massive financial headache go away, and we can all sit down for a lovely reconciliation dinner once Brittany fully recovers. We can put all this ugly business firmly behind us." Liam did not smile. He did not flinch. He did not show a single ounce of warmth or forgiveness. He simply lifted the heavy leather-bound legal folder he had been carrying under his arm and slammed it violently down onto the hard surface of the billing counter. The sharp, deafening crack echoed through the entire surgical waiting room, making both Richard and Susan jump out of their skin. Even Malik, who was still sitting in the corner analyzing the digital evidence of his ruined marriage, looked up at the sudden explosive sound. "Reconciliation," Liam repeated slowly, letting the word roll off his tongue as if it were a highly toxic, poisonous substance. "You actually want me to use my hard-earned executive authority to completely erase a $75,000 deposit and a total surgical bill that will easily surpass $250,000 simply because we share a meaningless marriage certificate?" Liam flipped the heavy leather folder open. Inside were thick stacks of meticulously organized financial records, bank statements, and legal contracts. "Let me show you exactly what my executive authority has been relentlessly focused on for the past 5 consecutive years," Liam stated, his voice ringing with absolute terrifying clarity. "Because while you two were busy blindly funding Brittany and her imaginary corporate technology empire, my wife and I were fighting a brutal daily war just to keep our heads above the water." Liam pulled a massive stack of federal loan documents from the folder, spreading them out across the counter right under Richard's arrogant nose. "Look at these numbers, Richard. Look at the staggering interest rates. These are the private and federal student loan statements standing entirely in Allie's name. $300,000 of crippling medical school debt." Susan scoffed nervously, waving her manicured hand in the air. "Medical school is expensive for everyone, Liam. She chose that specific, highly demanding career path. She had a fully funded educational trust." Liam roared, his voice suddenly booming with a fierce, protective rage that made the security guards at the end of the hall immediately stand at attention. A massive trust set up by her late grandparents specifically to ensure she graduated completely debt-free. But 6 years ago, when Allie was exactly 1 month away from needing those critical funds for her tuition, you two marched directly into the bank. You used your legal guardianship loopholes to completely drain her entire trust. You signed official transfer papers moving every single cent of Allie's medical school money directly into Brittany's personal checking account so she could launch her fake technology company. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting away from the damning documents. "We made a parental executive decision. Brittany had a business plan that needed immediate capital." Allie was highly intelligent. "We knew she could figure out how to secure other scholarships." "She did not secure scholarships," Liam fired back, stepping right into Richard's personal space and forcing the older man to retreat a step. "She secured crippling debt because her own parents robbed her blind. For 5 straight years, I watched the brilliant woman I love work grueling 36-hour surgical rotations, coming home with her hands shaking from absolute physical exhaustion. I watched her eat cheap canned soup in our tiny, unheated studio apartment while we threw every single dollar we earned at this massive $300,000 mountain of debt. We sacrificed our 20s. We skipped our own honeymoon. We worked ourselves to the absolute bone to pay off the massive financial burden you deliberately shoved onto her shoulders just to fund your golden child's shopping sprees." Malik sat in the corner, his jaw tightly clenched, as he listened to the horrifying reality of his wife's supreme selfishness. He had known Brittany was a thief, but hearing that she had literally stolen her own sister's medical school tuition made his stomach violently churn. Susan began to cry genuine tears of panic, realizing that her manipulative emotional tactics were entirely useless against a man who possessed all the receipts and held all the power. "Liam, please," Susan begged, her voice cracking. "We were tricked. Brittany manipulated us too. We are victims in this situation as well." "You are not victims," Liam stated coldly, gathering the papers and tapping them into a neat, sharp stack. You were willing accomplices in the attempted destruction of my wife's life. You stood in my hospital, demanded the best surgeon, and expected me to hand you a generous family discount. Liam slid the folder back under his arm, restoring his immaculate, terrifyingly calm corporate posture. He looked at Richard, whose face was now completely drained of blood, and then at Susan, who was openly sobbing into her hands. Let me make the legal and financial reality of your situation crystal clear, Liam said, his voice dropping into a register of pure, uncompromising finality. I will not waive a single cent of your surgical bill. I will not authorize any financial assistance programs. I will not lift a finger to protect your assets from the hospital collection agency. You severed your familial ties the day you stole her college fund. Liam turned his back on them, looking over his shoulder to deliver the final crushing blow. In this hospital, you are nothing but walk-in clients who owe us money. Liam turned the corner and completely disappeared from view, leaving a suffocating dead silence in the surgical waiting room. Richard stood frozen, his face drained of all color, staring at the empty hallway where his last hope for financial rescue had just vanished. Susan was hyperventilating, her hands gripping her expensive pearl necklace so hard the string looked ready to snap. They had just been completely disowned, utterly humiliated, and left holding a surgical bill that would undoubtedly bankrupt them. But the absolute destruction of the Thorne family was not over. It had barely even begun. Malik rose from his plastic chair in the far corner of the room. He did not look like the exhausted, desperate husband who had rushed into the emergency room an hour ago. His posture was rigid, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying clarity. He walked across the waiting room with heavy, deliberate steps, carrying his open laptop in his large hands. He stopped directly in front of his mother-in-law and father-in-law. Richard blinked, trying to regain his typical arrogant composure. Malik. Richard commanded, his voice trembling slightly. Put that computer away. We need to focus on finding a way to transfer funds. We need to call our financial advisor right now and liquidate some assets to pay for this ridiculous hospital deposit. Malik did not answer. He simply lifted the heavy laptop and slammed it violently down onto the glass coffee table sitting between them. The sharp, aggressive crack of metal hitting glass echoed through the room. Susan shrieked and jumped backward, clutching Richard's arm. Look at the screen! Malik growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded absolute obedience. Look at the brilliant technology empire your golden child built. Look at exactly what you traded your other daughter for. Richard hesitated, his eyes darting toward the glowing monitor. Susan peeked over his shoulder. The screen was filled with perfectly organized spreadsheets, highlighted bank transfers, and dozens of digital receipts. What is this? Susan asked, her voice shaking with sudden dread. This is the complete financial autopsy of a sociopath, Malik stated brutally. He pointed a firm finger at a highlighted column of massive deductions. That right there is the $500,000 retirement fund you handed over to her 6 years ago. You said she needed it for servers, software developers, and corporate infrastructure. I hacked into her hidden offshore accounts 10 minutes ago. Do you know how many software developers your daughter actually employs? 0. Do you know how many corporate assets she owns? 0. Richard stepped closer to the screen, his eyes widening in pure horror as he read the vendor names attached to the massive transactions. This cannot be right, Richard stammered, pointing a shaking finger at a line item. $40,000 to the Burj Al Arab Hotel in Dubai, $60,000 at a Hermès boutique in Paris. Oh, it gets much better. Malik fired back, his tone dripping with absolute venom. Scroll down, Richard. Look at the $80,000 she dropped on private yacht rentals in Monaco. Look at the $30,000 spent on custom diamond jewelry in Milan. While I was working 80-hour weeks writing code to pay our mortgage, and while you two were busy patting yourselves on the back for raising a prodigy, your daughter was bleeding all of us completely dry to fund a fake billionaire aesthetic. Susan shook her head wildly, refusing to accept the collapse of her perfect reality. No, you are misunderstanding everything, she cried out desperately. Brittany is a highly sought-after lifestyle influencer. She is building a massive personal brand. Those are legitimate business expenses. She has to maintain an image to attract elite angel investors. She is a chief executive officer. Malik threw his head back and let out a loud, hollow laugh that held absolutely no humor. A chief executive officer, Malik repeated, his voice echoing with pure disgust. Susan, your daughter does not even have a basic business license. But do you want to know what she does have? Do you want to know what she actually created with your life savings and my stolen salary? Malik aggressively tapped the trackpad on the laptop, minimizing the financial spreadsheets and opening a hidden digital folder he had extracted from Brittany's encrypted cloud drive. He maximized the screen. Dozens of high-definition, highly explicit photographs and videos flooded the monitor. In every single image, Brittany was posing in the luxury hotel suites and on the private yachts she had rented with their stolen money. Susan gasped loudly, violently, covering her mouth with both hands as she stumbled backward. Richard let out a choked, horrified sound, his eyes glued to the screen in utter disbelief. "Welcome to her actual startup," Malik declared ruthlessly. "Your highly successful, brilliant daughter is nothing but a high-end OnlyFans creator. She used your $500,000 retirement fund to hire professional photography crews, rent exotic cars, and buy designer wardrobes just so she could post explicit content on the internet and pretend to be a wealthy socialite for her subscribers. She burned your entire financial future to the ground simply to feed her own disgusting narcissism." The waiting room fell into a suffocating dead silence. The absolute magnitude of the betrayal finally crashed down on Richard and Susan. The heavy, impenetrable wall of denial they had built around their golden child shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Susan turned slowly toward Richard, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "This is your fault," she screamed, slamming her fists against her husband's chest. "You are the one who insisted we give her the money. You told me she was a genius. You told me giving her Allie's tuition fund was a brilliant investment. You ruined us. You left us with absolutely nothing." Richard grabbed Susan's wrists violently, shoving her hands away from him. "Do not you dare put this on me!" Richard roared back, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You coddled her for 30 years. You enabled her every single whim. You are the one who hated Allie for being smarter than you. You pushed our only successful child out the door just so you could play dress-up with your precious psychotic pageant queen. We are bankrupt because of your blind, stupid favoritism." The two of them began viciously tearing into each other, right in the middle of the hospital lobby, completely abandoning any shred of dignity or public decency. They screamed about the mortgaged house, the stolen credit cards, and the impending absolute poverty that was staring them right in the face. The perfect, wealthy Thorne family was officially eating itself alive, blaming each other for the devastating consequences of their own toxic parenting. Malik stood there for a moment, watching the two people who had proudly enabled the monster he married completely destroy each other. He felt absolutely nothing for them. No pity, no anger, just a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation. He reached down, snapped his laptop shut, and slid it calmly into his backpack. He zipped the bag, hoisted it onto his shoulder, and looked at his screaming in-laws one last time. "I am filing for a contested divorce, the absolute second the courthouse opens tomorrow morning," Malik announced, his voice cutting cleanly through their screaming match. "I am handing all of this financial evidence directly over to my attorney and the federal fraud department. You two can stay here and figure out how to pay that $250,000 hospital bill all by yourselves. Have a wonderful life in bankruptcy." Malik turned his back on the screaming couple and walked straight toward the hospital exit. He did not look back. He did not care if Brittany survived the surgery or not. He was finally free from the toxic wreckage of the Thorne family, and he was leaving them exactly where they belonged, entirely alone with the disastrous consequences of their own actions. The harsh fluorescent lights of Operating Room 4 hummed a low, steady rhythm as the final suture was securely tied and clipped. I stepped back from the surgical table, dropping my bloody instruments into the metal sterile basin with a sharp clatter. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiopulmonary monitors confirmed what my hands had already achieved. Brittany was completely stabilized. Her chest was closed, and her heart was beating on its own. I had meticulously repaired the catastrophic aortic tear that should have killed her. I stripped off my saturated surgical gown and peeled the latex gloves from my sweating hands, tossing them into the biohazard bin. I did not feel a single ounce of sisterly relief or maternal joy. I only felt the heavy physical exhaustion of standing over an operating table for hours, executing high-stakes medical maneuvers with zero margin for error. I walked to the scrub sink, washing my hands and forearms in scalding hot water. I watched the pink iodine soap swirl down the stainless steel drain, taking whatever lingering adrenaline I had left right along with it. I dried my hands and slipped into my crisp white lab coat, adjusting the collar with mechanical precision. I walked over to the nurse's station inside the surgical wing and pulled up Brittany's medical file on the computer terminal. I typed in my specific surgical billing codes, bypassing the general hospital administrative fees, to generate my personal invoice as the attending specialist and chief of surgery. The printer whirred to life, spitting out a single sheet of paper. I picked it up, clipping it firmly to a heavy wooden clipboard. I pushed through the heavy double doors and walked down the long, quiet corridor toward the surgical waiting room. The chaotic energy from earlier had completely vanished. The room was mostly empty now, save for two pathetic figures sitting on opposite ends of a plastic waiting bench. Richard and Susan looked as though they had been run over by a freight train. Their expensive designer clothes were rumpled. Susan's makeup was horribly smeared down her cheeks from crying, and Richard was staring blankly at the floor, completely stripped of his usual booming arrogance. The moment the heavy doors clicked shut behind me, Susan's head snapped up. Her bloodshot eyes widened as she took in my white coat and calm demeanor. The manipulative gears in her brain instantly started grinding again, desperately searching for a lifeline. She jumped up from the plastic chair and rushed toward me, forcing a trembling, watery smile onto her tear-stained face. "Oh, Allie!" Susan cried out, her voice dripping with a sickening manufactured warmth. "You did it! You saved your sister! I knew you were brilliant! We are so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. I was so scared, but I knew my amazing, talented daughter would never let her family down. Come here and let your mother hug you." She reached out, throwing her arms wide open to embrace me. She fully intended to use this fabricated moment of maternal affection to sweep 6 years of horrific emotional abuse completely under the rug. She wanted to play the role of the relieved, loving mother who had simply experienced a temporary family misunderstanding. I did not step back, but I raised my left hand, placing my palm flat and rigid against the center of her chest, stopping her forward motion instantly. The physical rejection was so firm and absolute that Susan actually gasped, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides. "Do not ever attempt to touch me, Susan," I commanded, my voice echoing with a cold, sterile detachment that made the air in the waiting room feel like ice. "We are not having a heartfelt family reunion. We are not sweeping your toxic behavior away because you suddenly realized I am useful to you. I did not save her life because she is my sister. I saved her life because I took an oath to do no harm, and leaving her to bleed to death on my operating table would have been a massive violation of my medical license." Richard slowly stood up from the bench, his face pale and drawn. He approached cautiously, entirely stripped of the wealthy executive persona he loved to project. "Allie, please," Richard murmured, his voice cracking under the weight of his absolute financial ruin. "You have to understand the immense pressure we are under right now. Malik just left. He took his laptop and all the financial evidence. He is filing for divorce and pressing federal fraud charges against Brittany. We have absolutely zero access to any money. We are completely bankrupt. You have to help us out of this nightmare." I stared at the man who had proudly disowned me 6 years ago. The man who had sneered at my ambitions and handed my entire college fund over to a sociopathic liar. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "I am not a bank, and I am certainly not your personal savior," I stated brutally, looking him directly in his hollow eyes. "I am an independent medical contractor operating within this facility, and as a highly specialized contractor, I expect to be compensated for my highly specialized labor." I raised the heavy wooden clipboard and shoved it directly into Richard's chest, forcing him to grab it with both hands. "That is my personal itemized invoice for the emergency cardiothoracic procedure I just performed," I announced, my words slicing through their desperate illusions. $45,000. That does not include the hospital deposit. That does not include the operating room fees, the anesthesia, or the intensive care unit bed your golden child is currently occupying. That is strictly my personal fee for opening her chest and fixing the disaster you so proudly raised." Susan let out a horrified, choked sob, staring at the staggering number printed in bold black ink at the bottom of the page. "You cannot do this to us." Susan shrieked, her fake affection instantly dissolving back into vicious entitlement. "We are your parents. You cannot send us a bill for $45,000. We literally just told you we are completely bankrupt. We do not have a single dime to our names." I crossed my arms over my chest, projecting the absolute authority of a woman who had built an empire from the ground up. "You should have thought about your financial liquidity before you signed away my $300,000 educational trust," I replied coldly, lacking even a fraction of an ounce of sympathy. "You should have thought about emergency funds before you let Brittany use your retirement accounts to buy luxury sports cars and designer handbags." Richard's hands shook violently as he held the clipboard. The paper rustled against the wood, amplifying the pathetic reality of his situation. "Allie, please," Richard begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "If you enforce this bill, the collection agencies will take our house. They will take our cars. They will garnish whatever social security we have left. We will be homeless." I looked at him, my face an unreadable mask of absolute stone. 6 years ago, I was sleeping on the freezing concrete floor of the university library. I reminded them, my voice deadly calm and dangerously precise. "I was eating leftover crackers from the cafeteria vending machines because you deliberately starved me out to fund her fake corporate lifestyle. You did not care if I was homeless then. You did not care if I starved then. You only care now because the natural consequences of your own disgusting actions have finally arrived at your front door." I turned my back on them, stepping toward the heavy double doors leading back to the secure hospital corridors. "The main billing department is down the hall to your left," I said loudly over my shoulder, not bothering to look back at their ruined faces. "You have exactly 30 days to remit the $45,000 payment in full to my private medical practice. If the balance is not settled by the deadline, my financial team will automatically forward the debt to the most aggressive collection agency in Chicago, and they will enthusiastically dismantle whatever tiny, pathetic scraps of your life you still have left. Have a terrible evening." I pushed the doors open and walked away, leaving Richard and Susan standing completely alone in the surgical waiting room, gripping a piece of paper that officially finalized their total and absolute destruction. The steady rhythmic beeping of the intensive care unit monitors provided a sterile soundtrack to the room. The heavy privacy curtain was pulled back slightly, revealing the dark Chicago skyline through the reinforced window. I stood at the side of the hospital bed, holding a digital tablet and reviewing the post-operative data with complete detachment. The heavy sedation was finally wearing off. The breathing tube had been removed an hour ago. Brittany shifted against the crisp white hospital sheets. Her eyelids fluttered rapidly as she fought her way out of the chemical haze. She let out a dry, raspy cough and slowly turned her head. Her bleary eyes struggled to focus in the dim lighting before finally locking onto my face. The absolute shock of seeing me standing over her in a pristine white doctor coat temporarily paralyzed her. Then the muscle memory of 30 years of toxic manipulation kicked in. Her face instantly contorted into a mask of pure manufactured terror. She pressed her back hard against the mattress, treating me like a dangerous predator. She began to hyperventilate, clutching the edges of the blanket with her pale hands. "Get away from me!" she shrieked, her voice hoarse and ragged from the breathing tube, but carrying enough volume to echo off the walls. "You did this on purpose. You deliberately hurt me on that operating table. You are a jealous psychopath and you tried to kill me." I did not react. I simply tapped the screen on my medical tablet, updating her fluid intake charts. I treated her screaming accusation with the exact same indifference I would give to a malfunctioning hospital printer. "Where are my parents?" Brittany wailed, turning her head frantically from side to side, looking for her usual audience of enablers. "Mom. Dad. Help me. She is going to kill me. Get this drug addict away from me. Where is my husband? Malik, please help me." I calmly placed the tablet on the rolling bedside tray. "Your parents are currently standing at the billing department desk trying to figure out how to pay the massive surgical deposit they cannot afford." I stated, my voice entirely flat and professional. "And your heart graft is holding perfectly. Your blood pressure is returning to normal parameters. You are welcome, by the way." Brittany ignored the medical update completely. She spotted a tall figure standing completely still in the shadows at the absolute foot of her hospital bed. "Malik," she sobbed, reaching her arms out toward him in a dramatic display of helpless victimhood. "Malik, please come here. Tell security to arrest her." She opened my chest. "She wants me dead because she has always hated my success. She is a total failure and she wants to ruin my life. Protect me from her." Malik stepped forward into the harsh light of the intensive care unit. He did not rush to her side. He did not reach out to hold her trembling hands. He did not offer a single word of comfort. He stood rigidly at the foot of the bed with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His face was carved from solid stone. The warm, supportive husband, who had worked 80 hours a week to fund her dreams, was completely gone. In his place stood a man who had spent the last 2 hours analyzing the total destruction of his credit score and his future. Brittany let her arms drop slightly, her theatrical crying faltering as she registered the freezing temperature of his glare. "Malik," she whimpered, attempting to force a fresh wave of tears. "What is wrong? Why are you looking at me like that? Take me home right now." Malik stared down at the woman he had promised to spend his life with. "You went on a luxury vacation to the Maldives last month, did you not?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet and meticulously controlled. The question hit Brittany like a physical blow. Her fake tears instantly stopped. The color that had just returned to her face drained away completely, leaving her looking like a terrified ghost. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward me and then back to her husband. "What are you talking about?" Brittany stammered, her voice losing its dramatic volume. "That was a critical business trip. I had to pitch my technology startup to a group of international angel investors. You know how stressful that was for me. I was working around the clock. You paid for that critical business trip using a hidden high-limit credit card opened entirely under my name and my social security number," Malik stated brutally, dissecting her lie with absolute precision. "You spent $14,000 on a private overwater bungalow. You spent $3,000 on designer swimwear. And you did it while telling me we needed to tighten our household budget because your servers required expensive upgrades." Brittany opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The pristine mask of the successful chief executive officer was violently ripped from her face. She looked at Malik and saw the digital receipts reflecting in his furious eyes. She realized in that exact, terrifying second that her entire hidden world had been blown wide open. It was for the brand, Brittany whispered desperately, reverting to her final line of defense. "I had to project wealth to secure the funding, Malik. You do not understand the extreme pressure of building a corporate empire from scratch. I did it for us. I did it for our financial future. Do not ever include me in your twisted delusions again." Malik fired back, his voice rising with a furious, undeniable authority. "You do not have a corporate empire. You have an explicit internet page and a massive mountain of stolen money. I hacked your encrypted accounts while you were on the operating table. I saw every single bank transfer. I saw the $500,000 retirement fund you stole from your parents. I saw the health insurance policy you canceled 8 months ago while continuing to drain my paycheck every single month." Brittany began to physically shake. Her eyes darted wildly around the small room, looking for an exit, a lifeline, or an excuse. She found absolutely nothing. She was trapped in a hospital bed wired to a dozen medical monitors, completely exposed and stripped of her enablers. "I am leaving you," Malik announced, delivering the ultimate killing blow with zero hesitation. "I have already locked every single joint account. I have forwarded all the financial evidence to my attorney, and I am filing for a contested divorce the absolute moment the courthouse opens. You can stay in this bed and figure out how to explain your fraudulent lifestyle to the federal investigators who will inevitably come looking for the money you stole from everyone." Malik turned on his heel without another word. He did not look back at the tears now streaming genuinely down Brittany's face. He walked out of the intensive care unit, letting the heavy glass door slide shut behind him. Brittany let out a choked, agonizing wail, finally realizing the absolute magnitude of her ruin. Her husband was gone, her money was gone, her parents were bankrupt. She slowly turned her head and looked at me, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated panic. I simply picked up my digital tablet from the tray. "Your heart rate is elevating," I noted coldly, typing the data into her chart. "I highly suggest you practice deep breathing exercises. Intense stress is incredibly bad for a newly sutured aorta." I turned around and walked out of the room, leaving her completely alone with the terrifying reality of the life she had destroyed. The heavy sliding glass door clicked shut, sealing Malik's departure and leaving a suffocating toxic silence in the intensive care unit. Brittany stared at the empty doorway, her chest heaving aggressively against the crisp hospital blankets as the absolute reality of her ruined marriage set in. Then her gaze snapped back to me. The pathetic manufactured panic in her eyes instantly dissolved, replaced entirely by a venomous, unhinged rage that had defined our relationship since childhood. She yanked at the intravenous lines taped to her arm, her face twisting into an incredibly ugly sneer. "This is exactly what you wanted." Brittany spat her voice, a harsh, rasping hiss that fought against the lingering soreness of her throat. "You planned this whole thing just to destroy my life. You could not stand seeing me happily married and financially successful. You always had to ruin everything for me, you miserable, jealous witch." I remained perfectly still at the foot of her hospital bed, casually crossing my arms over my pristine white doctor coat. "You destroyed your own life the exact moment you stole $500,000 from our parents and drained your husband's bank accounts to fund a fake internet aesthetic," I replied with absolute clinical detachment. "I simply kept your heart beating long enough for you to face the legal and financial consequences of your own sociopathic behavior." "Consequences!" she shrieked, slamming her fist weakly against the mattress, the heart monitor instantly spiking in response to her blinding anger. "You are the one who deserves consequences. You think you are so vastly superior standing there in your stupid hospital uniform. You think you are better than me just because you can memorize a medical textbook. You were always a pathetic, boring little nerd who thought she was the absolute center of the universe just because she got a few academic scholarships." I tilted my head slightly, my expression remaining entirely carved from stone. I needed her to keep talking. I needed her narcissism to completely override her basic survival instincts. "Is that exactly why you told Mom and Dad I was a severe drug addict 6 years ago?" I asked, my voice dangerously low and steady, carefully baiting the trap I had laid for her. "Yes," Brittany screamed, completely abandoning any shred of decency, shame, or self-preservation. "I did it because I was sick to my stomach of hearing about you. Every single family dinner, every holiday, it was always Allison's perfect grades, Allison's medical school acceptance, Allison's brilliant future. I was the pretty one. I was the one who was supposed to be the absolute star of the family. But you just would not step aside and let me shine. You made me look like a total failure in my own house." She let out a bitter, ugly laugh that triggered the medical machines around her to beep even faster. "So I leveled the playing field," she declared proudly, a sickeningly triumphant smile spreading across her pale face. "I planted those empty pill bottles in your bathroom drawer. I faked the emails to the university administration. I sat at the kitchen table and cried my eyes out while I told Mom and Dad you were shooting up illegal substances in filthy alleyways. It was so incredibly easy. They desperately wanted an excuse to favor me anyway. You were too independent, too stubborn. They wanted a daughter they could control, and I gave them exactly what they wanted. I did not interrupt her. I let the absolute poison of her confession fill the sterile room, absorbing every single word without showing a fraction of an ounce of emotional pain. And taking your massive college trust fund was just the ultimate bonus. Brittany continued, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated greed. I deserve that money far more than you ever did. I deserve to live in absolute luxury, to wear designer clothes, to travel the world in first class. You would have just wasted all that cash on boring medical tuition and cheap hospital scrubs. I took what was rightfully mine because I am a star, and you are just a miserable mechanic who cuts people open for a living. I spent every single dime of your educational fund on myself, and I do not regret a single second of it. I would do it all over again if I could. I let her vile words hang in the sterile air for a long, heavy moment. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. I simply reached into the pocket of my white coat, pulled out my smartphone, and sent a single pre-written text message to Liam. The message contained only 2 words. We got it. I looked back up at the woman who shared my biological DNA but possessed absolutely none of my humanity. You really should pay much closer attention to hospital administrative policies and legal protocols. I stated, my voice echoing with a chilling absolute finality. What are you talking about? Brittany snapped, her eyes narrowing with sudden creeping suspicion as her arrogant smile finally began to falter. I raised my right hand and pointed a single steady finger toward the upper corner of the hospital room, directly above her bed. Nestled discreetly beside the smoke detector was a small high-definition security camera. A tiny solid red light was glowing brightly on its side, blinking in a steady, continuous rhythm. Hospital legal policy strictly dictates that any patient with a documented history of severe psychological manipulation, severe financial fraud, or false accusations against medical staff must be placed under continuous audio and visual surveillance to protect the attending physicians from malicious litigation. I explained calmly, watching the color rapidly drain from her face for the second time that night. My husband, the chief legal officer of this entire medical institution, personally authorized the high-definition recording equipment in this specific room, 10 minutes before you woke up from anesthesia. Brittany gasped loudly, a horrific choking sound tearing from her throat. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stared in absolute paralyzed horror at the glowing red light on the ceiling. Every single word you just said, I continued, relentlessly stepping closer to the bed to deliver the absolute killing blow to her entire existence. Your complete uncoerced admission of framing me for illegal drug use, your gleeful confession to stealing a $300,000 educational trust fund, your blatant admission of committing severe financial fraud against our parents to fund your luxury vacations. It is all safely recorded on a secure encrypted hospital server. And Liam has already submitted the digital audio and video files directly to the federal authorities and Malik's divorce attorneys as hard, undeniable evidence of your extensive criminal history. You just handed us the exact weapon we needed to put you in federal prison. Have a wonderful recovery. The heavy mahogany door of my private executive office swung open with a sudden jarring force. I sat comfortably behind my sleek glass desk, holding a silver fountain pen and reviewing a complex stack of post-operative patient charts. I did not look up immediately. I took my time meticulously signing my name at the bottom of a surgical file before finally raising my eyes to acknowledge the intrusion. Susan stood trembling in the doorway. The arrogant, wealthy matriarch who had viciously screamed at my triage nurses just hours ago had been completely erased from existence. In her place stood a broken, haggard woman. Her expensive silk blouse was deeply wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. Her flawless makeup had entirely washed away, leaving her skin looking pale, hollow, and deeply lined with sudden, rapid aging. She looked exactly like a woman who had just stared directly into the terrifying bottomless abyss of absolute financial ruin. She staggered into my office, clutching a thick stack of hospital billing papers in her violently shaking hands. The administrative department had clearly followed my explicit instructions and wasted absolutely no time. Susan dropped the crumpled papers onto the edge of my immaculate desk. The bold red numbers printed at the very bottom of the itemized invoice glared up at the ceiling. $250,000. Allie. Susan choked out, her voice reduced to a fragile, pathetic whimper that lacked any of its previous commanding authority. The billing administrator just handed us this surgical estimate. They are demanding an immediate structured payment plan for $250,000. They said if we do not sign the financial liability forms today, they will send the entire balance directly to a predatory collection agency by the end of the week. I leaned back slowly into my ergonomic leather chair, crossing my arms over my chest and staring at her with cold, clinical detachment. Cardiothoracic surgery is an incredibly resource-intensive medical specialty, Susan. I stated, my tone completely devoid of any familial sympathy. I explicitly warned you about the overwhelming costs before I walked into that operating room. Quality healthcare in America is a brutal business for the uninsured. Susan shook her head wildly, fresh tears spilling over her eyelashes and dropping onto her ruined blouse. It is not just the massive hospital bill, Allie. Richard just got off the phone with the bank manager. The federal fraud department called him right after Malik triggered the digital financial alerts. Brittany did not just steal our $500,000 retirement fund to pay for her luxury vacations. I raised a single eyebrow, silently waiting for the rest of the devastating financial equation to finally drop. She took out a massive second mortgage on our suburban estate. Susan sobbed, her knees visibly buckling under the crushing weight of her horrific reality. She forged our signatures on the banking loan documents 3 years ago. She maxed out the equity of our home to buy her designer clothes and fund her disgusting internet account. The bank manager just informed Richard that they are officially foreclosing on our property by the end of this month. We have absolutely nothing left. The joint checking accounts are completely empty. We are going to be living on the street. Then the exact same woman who had proudly called me a drug-addicted, miserable failure dropped directly to her knees right in the middle of my pristine office floor. She crawled forward on the carpet, reaching out with desperate, grasping hands to clutch the hem of my white doctor coat. She completely abandoned any remaining shred of human dignity. "Please, Allie," Susan wailed, burying her tear-stained face against my knees in a theatrical display of manufactured absolute surrender. "I am so incredibly sorry. I was blind. I was a foolish, terrible mother. I let her lie to me. But I am still your mother. You cannot let your own flesh and blood freeze on the unforgiving streets of Chicago. Blood is thicker than water. A mother and a daughter cannot possibly hold hatred in their hearts overnight. We belong together. We are family." She looked up at me from the floor, her eyes wide with a sickening, calculated hope that genuinely repulsed me. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was attempting to weaponize biological obligation to secure a comfortable financial rescue. "You and Liam have that massive, beautiful penthouse downtown." Susan pleaded, her voice rising in a frantic, opportunistic pitch. "Richard and I could easily move into your guest wing. We would not be any trouble at all. We could cook for you. We could clean. We can be a real loving family again. You and your husband have more than enough wealth to cover this hospital bill and pay off the bank. You are a highly successful surgeon. You can save us from this nightmare. We can start completely over." "Allie," Susan babbled, her tears soaking into the fabric of my coat. "We can pretend the last 6 years never happened. We will erase all the ugly arguments. I will publicly apologize to Liam for how I treated him in the waiting room. I will do whatever you want me to do. Just please write a check to the hospital billing department and let us pack our bags tonight. I cannot sleep in a homeless shelter. I am a respectable woman. I cannot survive out there." She continued to sob, burying her face into her hands, completely convinced that her performance of ultimate submission would trigger some hidden reserve of daughterly affection deep within my heart. She believed that my professional success automatically guaranteed my financial compliance. She honestly thought that a few cheap, pathetic tears could instantly purchase a $250,000 pardon and a lifetime of free luxury housing. I looked down at the woman kneeling on my floor. I did not pull my coat away from her grasping hands. I simply let her hold on to the fabric, watching her grovel with the exact same cold, analytical gaze I used to examine a malignant, toxic tumor before deciding the best method to surgically excise it from a healthy body. She was not crying because she had experienced a genuine moral awakening. She was not kneeling on my floor because she suddenly realized the agonizing depth of the trauma she had inflicted upon me for the past 6 years. She was only crying because her golden child had successfully bankrupted her. She was only kneeling because she needed a wealthy host to leech onto now that her primary source of income had been completely eradicated. She was trying to seamlessly transfer her parasitic dependency from her fraudulent daughter directly onto the very child she had violently discarded. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the suffocating silence stretch out in the room. I wanted her to feel the absolute terrifying weight of the silence. I wanted her to hang suspended by a thin, fragile thread of hope before I took a pair of surgical scissors and cut it completely. I stared down at the trembling woman, clinging desperately to the hem of my white doctor coat. I did not feel a single flicker of pity or familial warmth. I felt absolutely nothing but the cold, sterile satisfaction of a surgeon identifying a necrotic tumor right before excising it. I reached down and methodically pried her manicured fingers off my pristine uniform one by one. I stepped back, forcing Susan to lose her balance and slump forward onto the thick carpet of my office. She let out a pathetic, wounded gasp, looking up at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. She genuinely expected me to crack. She fully expected the deeply ingrained societal programming of daughterly duty to magically override a lifetime of profound psychological trauma. She thought throwing herself onto the floor would force me to open my checkbook and erase her $250,000 disaster. I walked slowly behind my heavy glass desk and looked out the massive window at the glowing Chicago skyline. "Let us take a quick trip down memory lane, Susan," I said, my voice eerily calm and completely devoid of any emotional fluctuation. Let us rewind the clock exactly 6 years. It was the middle of January. The temperature outside was dropping well below zero. I had just finished a brutal 48-hour clinical rotation. I walked back to my tiny, freezing off-campus apartment only to find a bright pink eviction notice taped securely to my front door. I turned around to face her. She was still on her knees, her breathing shallow and ragged, her eyes darting around the room, as if searching for an escape route from her own past. I had exactly 24 hours to produce $500. I continued enunciating every single syllable so the memory would carve itself permanently into her brain. $500 was the absolute bare minimum I needed to keep a roof over my head while I studied for my final medical board examinations. I had exhausted every single student loan option. I had sold my car. I had literally nothing left to give. So I swallowed every single ounce of my pride and dignity, and I dialed your phone number. "Do you remember answering that phone call, Susan?" I asked, coldly, stepping away from the window and moving back toward the center of the room. "Do you remember what you did when your own flesh and blood called you sobbing in the freezing cold, begging for a fraction of the money you had just happily handed over to Brittany so she could fund her luxury lifestyle?" Susan shook her head frantically, pressing her hands over her ears, as if she could physically block out the horrifying reality of her own actions. "No, Allie, please stop," she whimpered, her voice cracking under the crushing weight of her inescapable guilt. I did not know. I did not understand how bad it was. "You understood perfectly," I fired back, my voice echoing off the walls with terrifying authority. "You did not just say no. You laughed at me. You told me I was a disgraceful, pathetic failure. You told me I was lying about medical school to feed a fictional drug addiction. And then, right before you slammed the phone down, you said the exact words that severed our relationship forever. You said, 'You are a filthy, ungrateful disgrace. Do not ever call me your mother again.' And then you blocked my number permanently. Susan let out a loud, agonizing wail, burying her face into the carpet, as the undeniable truth of her cruelty was shoved directly into her face. "You threw me away to the freezing streets of Chicago for $500, Susan. You left me to freeze and starve for $500, I stated brutally, towering over her cowering form. And now you have the absolute staggering audacity to crawl onto my office floor weeping about your foreclosed suburban mansion and demand that my husband and I foot $250,000 hospital bill while letting you live rent-free in our luxury penthouse. You do not want a daughter. You want a wealthy, unlimited automated teller machine to replace the one your golden child just broke." I turned my back on her and reached over to my designer leather tote bag, resting on the corner of the glass desk. I unzipped the main compartment and pulled out my wallet. I snapped it open. The sharp metallic sound made Susan flinch visibly on the floor. I reached into the cash slot and slowly extracted 5 crisp, brand-new $100 bills. I walked back to the kneeling woman. Susan watched my hands, a sudden sickening flash of greedy hope sparking in her bloodshot eyes. Even now, kneeling in the absolute wreckage of her own destroyed life, her parasitic nature could not help but react to the sight of physical currency. She truly believed I was about to hand her cab fare or a hotel deposit. She thought her pathetic theatrical display had finally broken through my defenses and secured a financial lifeline. I held the $500 directly over her head. I did not hand the money to her. I simply opened my fingers and let the green bills flutter down through the cold, conditioned air of the office. They landed gently on the carpet, scattering right over her trembling, tear-soaked hands. Susan stared at the money on the floor, completely paralyzed by the gesture. Her breathing stopped entirely. She slowly raised her head to look at me, absolute terror finally settling into her eyes as she realized exactly what this transaction represented. It was not a lifeline. It was a permanent, irreversible execution of our biological ties. Here is the repayment for the physical labor of giving birth to me. I declared my voice a weapon of absolute chilling finality that left absolutely no room for negotiation or future contact. $500. The exact amount you decided my life was worth 6 years ago. Consider your biological invoice paid in full. Pick it up, walk out of my hospital, and never show your face in my presence again. From this exact moment on, we do not know each other. The heavy mahogany door of my private office did not just open this time, it was violently shoved backward, hitting the wall with a deafening, echoing crash. Richard stormed into the room, his face a terrifying, blotchy shade of crimson. He completely ignored the 5 crisp $100 bills scattered across the carpet. He ignored his wife weeping on the floor. His eyes were locked entirely on me, burning with the kind of arrogant, misplaced rage that only a man accustomed to blind obedience could possess. "You think you can extort us?" Richard bellowed, marching right up to the edge of my glass desk and slamming his fists down onto the surface. "You think you can hold my daughter's medical care hostage and slap us with a fraudulent $45,000 invoice? I am going to destroy you, Allison. I am calling the state medical board the absolute second I leave this building. I am going to file a massive medical malpractice lawsuit against you for severe abuse of power, patient coercion, and intentional emotional distress. I will personally see to it that your medical license is permanently revoked and you are thrown out of this hospital in absolute disgrace." I did not blink. I did not move an inch. I simply sat in my leather chair and looked at him, completely unbothered by a threat that held absolutely no legal weight. "You are not going to call anyone." "Richard," a deep, commanding voice echoed from the hallway. Liam stepped into the office, his presence instantly draining the oxygen from the room. He was flanked by 2 massive uniformed hospital security guards, who stepped inside and crossed their thick arms, physically blocking the only exit. Liam walked deliberately to my side, projecting an aura of absolute, uncompromising legal authority. He placed a sleek digital tablet and a thick, bright red legal folder directly onto my glass desk. "Before you start making ridiculous, empty threats about frivolous medical malpractice lawsuits, I highly suggest you listen to exactly what your precious golden child just confessed to in our intensive care unit. Liam stated, his voice a lethal, perfectly calibrated weapon. Liam tapped the screen of the tablet. Brittany's harsh, rasping voice filled my office, the high-definition audio capturing every single drop of her sociopathic greed. "I planted those empty pill bottles in your bathroom drawer," her recorded voice bragged. "I spent every single dime of your educational fund on myself, and I do not regret a single second of it. I would do it all over again if I could." Richard froze completely. The angry, throbbing veins in his neck stood out, but his jaw dropped as the undeniable sound of his favorite daughter proudly admitting to felony theft and psychological manipulation echoed off the walls. Liam tapped the screen again, silencing the recording. "That is a full, uncoerced confession to grand larceny, malicious defamation, and severe financial fraud," Liam stated smoothly. "But that is just the very beginning of your legal nightmare, Richard. Malik did not just leave you with a hospital bill. He handed my legal department the entire encrypted hard drive containing your daughter's complete financial history." Liam opened the red folder spreading out pages of detailed bank routing numbers and offshore account statements. "We have the digital footprint of every single illegal transaction. Your daughter committed federal wire fraud by funneling your retirement money through hidden overseas accounts to mask it from the Internal Revenue Service. She committed federal credit card fraud by stealing Malik's social security number to open high-limit accounts across state lines. These are not minor civil disputes. These are severe federal crimes carrying mandatory minimum prison sentences." Richard tried to speak, but no sound materialized. He was suffocating under the crushing, undeniable weight of the law. His eyes darted from the red folder to the security guard standing at the door. "And here is the most critical part of this entire equation." Liam continued, ruthlessly stepping closer to the desk and staring Richard down. "You and Susan signed the legal transfer documents to move Allie's educational trust fund into Brittany's fraudulent corporate accounts. Under strict federal law, that makes you two active co-conspirators in a massive financial embezzlement scheme. You signed your names on the dotted line to steal money from your own child to fund a criminal enterprise." Susan let out a muffled, terrified whimper from the floor, covering her ears as if she could physically block out the horrifying reality of their impending arrest. "If you even think about dialing the number for the state medical board," Liam warned, his tone dropping to a dark, chilling register, "or if you dare to file a single piece of paper against my wife, I will personally walk this entire red folder directly into the local field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I will hand them the audio confession. I will hand them the wire fraud evidence. And I will make sure the prosecuting attorney knows exactly how deeply involved you and your wife were in the theft." The absolute silence in the office was deafening. The arrogant patriarch had been entirely dismantled, reduced to a hollow, trembling shell of a man. Richard looked at the tablet, then at the financial documents, and finally at the cold, unforgiving expression on Liam's face. He knew he was completely trapped. He had zero leverage, zero money, and zero escape routes. "The hospital billing department is expecting your payment plan for the $250,000 surgical bill by the end of the business day," Liam commanded, delivering the final crushing blow. "Allie's private invoice is due in 30 days. You are going to walk out of this hospital. You are going to liquidate whatever pathetic assets you have left to pay your massive debts, and you are never going to approach my wife again. If you refuse, I will make sure you and your wife spend your retirement years sitting in a federal penitentiary." Richard was broken. He slowly bent down, grabbing Susan by the arm and hauling her roughly to her feet. Susan's legs wobbled, her face entirely drained of blood. They did not look at the $500 still lying on the carpet. They did not look at Liam. And they absolutely did not dare to look at me. They turned around, their shoulders slumped in total agonizing defeat. They shuffled past the red folder and out the heavy mahogany door. The two security guards immediately fell into step right behind them, escorting the ruined, bankrupt remnants of the Thorne family out of the hospital and permanently out of my life. The heavy mahogany door remained open after the security guards escorted my ruined parents down the corridor. Liam stood by my desk for a brief moment, adjusting his suit jacket. He gave me a single respectful nod, communicating everything we did not need to say out loud. We had successfully executed the absolute destruction of the people who had tried to bury me. Liam turned and walked out to resume his duties as chief legal officer, leaving me alone in the quiet sanctuary of my office. I sat down in my leather chair, picking up my fountain pen to finish signing the post-operative charts. Less than 5 minutes passed before a sharp, deliberate knock echoed from the doorway. I looked up, expecting a surgical resident or a floor nurse. Instead, Malik stood at the threshold. My brother-in-law looked like he had lived an entire lifetime in the span of a single night. The aggressive, hostile energy he had radiated in the trauma bay was completely gone. His broad shoulders were squared, but his eyes carried the heavy, exhausted clarity of a man who had just survived a massive psychological earthquake. He held his laptop bag tightly by his side. Dr. Hayes Malik said, his voice low and incredibly steady. "Do you have 5 minutes?" I set my pen down and gestured to the leather guest chair positioned directly across from my glass desk. "Take a seat, Malik," I replied, maintaining my clinical, professional tone. Malik walked into the office and sat down heavily, resting his laptop bag on the floor. He did not beat around the bush. He did not offer empty pleasantries. He looked me directly in the eyes with a level of raw honesty that immediately commanded my respect. "I came here to give you a formal, absolute apology." Malik began, his voice firm and unwavering. "I walked into your emergency room and treated you like a criminal. I yelled at the woman who was actively saving my wife's life. I called you a drug addict and a thief because I was stupid enough to blindly swallow every single vile lie Brittany ever fed me. I believed her when she said you stole her college fund. I believed her when she said you were a homeless junkie. I defended a sociopath and I attacked a brilliant surgeon. I was completely wrong and I am deeply, deeply sorry." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man sitting across from me. He was a highly intelligent software architect, a man who built his entire career on logic and data. Yet he had been completely blinded by a master manipulator. I did not offer him a warm, forgiving smile, but I did give him my professional understanding. "You are not the first person to be manipulated by my biological family, Malik," I stated calmly, crossing my arms over my white coat. "Brittany has spent 30 years perfecting the art of playing the helpless victim. She built an entire fictional universe where she was the golden prodigy and I was the dark, shameful secret. You were just another collateral casualty in her desperate campaign for attention and unearned wealth. I accept your apology." Malik let out a long, slow breath, as if a massive physical weight had just been lifted off his chest. He sat up straighter, his expression hardening into a mask of pure, cold calculation. "I am not just here to apologize," Malik continued, leaning forward slightly. "I am here to inform you of exactly what is happening next." I spent the last 3 hours sitting in the hospital cafeteria with my laptop. I traced every single hidden account, every maxed-out credit card, and every fraudulent wire transfer she executed using my social security number. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by his swift, methodical approach. "I have officially locked down every single joint banking account we possess," Malik announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "I rerouted my direct deposits to a secure private account she cannot access. I froze the equity line of credit on our home. And at exactly 8 o'clock this morning, I retained a law firm and electronically filed for a unilateral, contested divorce." My lips curved into a very faint, sharp smile. I appreciated a man who knew how to amputate a necrotic limb without hesitation. "My attorneys have already filed an emergency ex parte motion for a temporary restraining order on all marital assets," Malik explained, laying out his tactical assault with lethal precision. "She cannot sell, transfer, or liquidate a single dime of our property. Furthermore, I am legally separating myself from any and all medical debts incurred during this hospital stay." Malik looked directly at the copy of the surgical invoice resting on the corner of my desk. I know exactly how much this procedure costs, he stated bluntly. The hospital deposit the intensive care unit fees and your personal $45,000 surgical bill. I want to make it crystal clear that I am not paying a single cent of it. Brittany committed massive financial fraud. She canceled her own health insurance policy to steal the premium money. She is a completely uninsured adult, and the $250,000 medical debt she just acquired belongs entirely and exclusively to her. My smile widened into a genuine expression of predatory approval. Malik had flawlessly executed a financial checkmate. He was leaving Brittany chained to a hospital bed with a $250,000 anchor tied directly to her neck. I think that is an incredibly sound financial strategy, Malik. I replied, my voice smooth and lethal. She played a very dangerous game of fraud, and now she gets to foot the massive, unavoidable bill all by herself. But if you are going to fight a parasite like Brittany in divorce court, you need to make absolutely certain she does not walk away with a single penny of your hard-earned software engineering salary. I opened the top drawer of my glass desk and pulled out a sleek, matte black business card. I slid it across the smooth surface toward him. Take this, I instructed, my tone dropping to a serious, confidential register. Her name is Sylvia Kensington. She is widely considered the most ruthless, bloodthirsty divorce attorney in the entire city of Chicago. She does not negotiate, and she absolutely does not settle for equitable distribution when fraud is involved. Liam and I have kept her on retainer for years just to handle high-conflict corporate acquisitions, but her specialty is completely eviscerating fraudulent spouses in family court. She utilizes forensic accountants who will track down every single cent Brittany ever embezzled. Malik picked up the black card, staring at the gold-embossed lettering. Call her private cellular number, I commanded. Tell her Dr. Allison Hayes sent you as a personal favor. Show her the digital folder of Brittany's fake corporate accounts, the stolen retirement funds, and the explicit internet content she used your money to fund. Sylvia will not just help you divorce her Malik. She will legally orchestrate a scenario where Brittany walks out of that courtroom with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back and a mountain of crushing, inescapable debt. She will ensure your ex-wife never sees a fraction of your retirement assets or your future earnings. Malik carefully slid the business card into the breast pocket of his jacket. The dark, exhausted circles under his eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by the fierce, burning energy of a man who had just been handed the exact weapon he needed to reclaim his entire life. He stood up from the leather chair, picking up his laptop bag with a renewed sense of absolute purpose. The heavy burden of the Thorne family toxicity had officially been severed from his shoulders. Thank you, Dr. Hayes, Malik said, his voice thick with genuine gratitude and cold determination. I am going to make sure she pays for every single lie she ever told. I watched him turn and walk toward the heavy mahogany door. Happy hunting, Malik? I called out softly just before he stepped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in my office to enjoy the quiet, beautiful sound of my sister's completely orchestrated, absolute destruction. 4 weeks later, the automatic sliding doors of the main hospital entrance hissed open. A bored orderly pushed a standard-issue hospital wheelchair onto the concrete drop-off lane. Brittany sat slumped in the vinyl seat, clutching a small plastic bag of prescribed medications and a massive, heavy stack of aggressively highlighted medical billing notices. She wore cheap gray sweatpants and a faded cotton shirt provided by the hospital charity closet because all her designer clothes had mysteriously vanished from her wardrobe prior to her discharge. She craned her neck, frantically scanning the circular driveway for Malik and his sleek black luxury sedan. She fully expected her husband to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness after a month of separation. Instead, a rusted 10-year-old compact rental car sputtered up to the curb, its brakes squealing loudly. The passenger window rolled down to reveal Susan, looking 20 years older, with unkempt hair and a cheap synthetic coat. "Get in the car, Brittany." Susan snapped, her voice lacking any trace of maternal warmth. "The bank repossessed your father's luxury vehicle yesterday morning. We are paying for this rental by the hour. Brittany stared in absolute horror, refusing to move from the wheelchair. Where is Malik? She demanded, her voice cracking. Where is my husband? Richard stepped out of the driver's side, slamming the dented door shut. Your husband officially secured an exclusive use order for your marital home from the family court judge 3 weeks ago. Richard barked aggressively, grabbing her arm to haul her out of the wheelchair. He filed a mountain of financial fraud evidence against you. You are permanently banned from the premises. Now get in the car before the hospital's security guards decide to charge us for loitering. Brittany refused to accept this harsh new reality. She screamed and thrashed, demanding Richard drive her directly to the upscale neighborhood where she and Malik had lived. When the rusted rental car finally pulled up to the familiar property, Brittany gasped. 4 heavy-duty black trash bags were sitting on the front porch, exposed to the cold Chicago wind. She stumbled out of the car, clutching her healing chest, and marched up the concrete steps. She grabbed the brass door handle and yanked it violently. It did not budge. She pounded her fists against the heavy oak door, screaming Malik's name. A small white piece of paper was taped securely above the keyhole. It was a formal legal notice of an ex parte protective order restricting her from coming within 500 feet of Malik or his property. A digital doorbell camera blinked a solid red light, recording her entire pathetic meltdown. Malik was watching her from somewhere secure, entirely legally protected by the ruthless divorce attorney I had recommended. He had thrown her cheap, fast fashion clothes into garbage bags and locked her completely out of the wealthy life she had stolen from him. Brittany collapsed onto her knees on the cold concrete, sobbing hysterically as she ripped open one of the trash bags. There were no designer shoes. There were no imported silk dresses. Malik had handed all of her expensive, fraudulently purchased assets over to a court-appointed liquidator to pay off the massive credit card debt she had secretly accumulated. She was left with absolutely nothing but cheap cotton t-shirts and $250,000 hospital bill. Richard dragged his screaming daughter back into the rental car and drove silently toward the affluent suburban neighborhood where he and Susan had lived for 2 decades. As they turned onto the familiar tree-lined street, Brittany looked out the window, hoping for the comforting sight of her childhood bedroom. Instead, a massive, aggressive red and white sign was hammered deep into the perfectly manicured front lawn. Bank foreclosure, absolute auction. A fleet of professional movers was actively carrying their custom Italian leather sofas, their imported crystal chandeliers, and their expensive antique dining table out the front door and loading them directly into a massive commercial moving truck. Neighbors stood on their manicured lawns, openly pointing and whispering, as the wealthy Thorne family was publicly dismantled. Richard gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The fraud department seized the equity line of credit you opened using forged signatures. Richard stated, his voice a dead, hollow monotone. The bank recalled the entire mortgage immediately. To keep us out of federal prison for financial conspiracy, your mother and I had to legally surrender the entire estate and liquidate every single piece of valuable furniture we owned. We have to wire $80,000 to the hospital collections department by tomorrow morning, just to stop them from garnishing our Social Security checks. We do not have a home anymore, Brittany. We do not have a retirement. We are completely ruined. They drove for another 45 minutes, leaving the wealthy manicured suburbs far behind and entering a bleak industrial sector of the city. Richard parked the sputtering rental car in front of a decaying brick apartment building with peeling paint and flickering streetlights. They dragged Brittany's garbage bags up 3 flights of narrow, dimly lit stairs because the elevator was permanently broken. Richard unlocked a flimsy wooden door, revealing a cramped 1-bedroom apartment that smelled strongly of mildew and stale cooking oil. A single stained mattress lay on the floor of the tiny bedroom. A thrift store sofa occupied the cramped living space. Brittany stood in the center of the depressing room, her eyes wide with total disbelief. "I cannot live here," she shrieked, clutching her chest. "I am recovering from major heart surgery. I need a sterile, comfortable environment. I am a highly successful creator. I need space to film my content. Susan dropped her cheap plastic purse onto the stained kitchen counter and turned on her daughter with the vicious ferocity of a starving animal. You do not have an internet career anymore, you stupid delusional parasite, Susan screamed, her face turning red with explosive, uncontainable rage. Malik seized your equipment, and the federal investigators flagged your accounts for severe money laundering. You stole our entire financial future to play dress-up on the internet. You lied to us about Allie. You let us throw away a brilliant, wealthy surgeon who could have supported us forever just so you could steal her tuition money. You are the reason we are rotting in this filthy, disgusting box. Brittany fired back, equally vicious, refusing to accept any accountability. You gave me that money because you wanted me to be better than her, Brittany yelled, her voice echoing painfully in the cramped space. You hated Allie because she never bowed down to you. You are the ones who chose to sign the bank transfers. You enabled me because you loved bragging about my fake startup to your wealthy country club friends. Do not act like you are innocent victims now. Richard slammed his fists against the cheap drywall, shaking the entire apartment. Both of you shut your mouths, he roared, his voice echoing down the miserable hallway. You are both toxic, lying failures who destroyed my entire legacy. The perfect wealthy family dynamic had officially completely imploded. They were now permanently trapped together in a tiny, miserable box, drowning in hundreds of thousands of dollars of inescapable medical and legal debt. There were no more luxury vacations. There were no more designer clothes. There was only the bitter, freezing reality of poverty and the daily, endless screaming matches as they viciously tore each other apart, blaming one another for the absolute catastrophic destruction of their lives. The soft ambient music of the exclusive downtown bridal and evening wear boutique provided a stark contrast to the grueling intensity of my surgical residency. I stood on a circular velvet pedestal entirely surrounded by floor-to-ceiling mirrors. A master seamstress knelt at my feet, meticulously pinning the hem of a stunning midnight blue silk gown. The fabric cascaded around me like liquid glass, catching the warm light of the crystal chandelier overhead. Liam sat comfortably on a plush leather sofa just a few feet away, holding a crystal flute of crisp champagne and watching me with a look of absolute unwavering adoration. We were preparing for the annual American Medical Association Gala, where I was scheduled to receive a highly prestigious national surgical award. My life was a portrait of immaculate success and untouchable peace. My personal smartphone vibrated silently on the marble side table next to Liam. He glanced at the illuminated screen and raised an eyebrow. It is an unknown local Chicago number, Liam noted smoothly, picking up the device. Do you want me to forward it to your hospital voicemail? I shook my head, extending my hand. It might be the overnight attending physician calling about the bypass patient in recovery, I replied. I took the phone and pressed the green answer button, lifting the device to my ear. Dr. Hayes speaking, I answered, projecting my standard, crisp, professional authority. A heavy, ragged breath crackled through the receiver. It sounded like a man who had been chain-smoking cheap cigarettes and swallowing jagged glass. Allie, a voice rasped violently, trembling with an ugly, pathetic mixture of extreme exhaustion and pure desperation. It is your father. It is Richard. Do not hang up the phone. Please do not hang up the phone. I did not gasp. My heart rate did not elevate by a single beat. I looked at my flawless reflection in the mirrors surrounding me. My posture remained perfectly straight and unbothered. I simply raised a hand, signaling the seamstress to continue pinning the expensive silk fabric. How did you get this private number, Richard? I asked, my tone dropping into a freezing clinical register that held absolutely zero familial warmth. I changed my contact information the exact week you legally signed my college trust fund over to a sociopath. I paid a private online data broker the very last $40 I had to my name to find your direct contact information. Richard confessed, his voice cracking pathetically. I am calling you from a cheap prepaid burner phone because the cellular company officially shut off all of our mobile lines yesterday morning. Allie, you have to listen to me. You have to help us. We are absolutely drowning. I listened to the background noise crackling through his cheap phone. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of police sirens and the loud, aggressive shouting of people in the street. He was calling me from the miserable, decaying apartment complex Malik had ruthlessly abandoned Brittany in. Your mother cannot even get out of bed. Richard sobbed, entirely abandoning any remaining shred of his former arrogant suburban patriarch persona. She just lays on that filthy stained mattress staring at the peeling paint on the wall, crying until she vomits. Brittany does nothing but scream at the top of her lungs, blaming both of us for her ruined life. She smashed the only television we had left because she cannot access her social media accounts anymore. The hospital collection agency calls the landline of the apartment manager every single day, demanding their $250,000. The landlord is threatening to evict us by the end of the week because we cannot even afford the miserable $800 rent for this roach-infested box. I stared at my reflection, admiring the elegant cut of the midnight blue gown. The seamstress adjusted a fold of silk across my shoulder, completely oblivious to the financial slaughter happening on the other end of my phone call. That sounds like an incredibly stressful administrative problem for the three of you to navigate, I stated brutally, my voice smooth and lethal. But it sounds absolutely nothing like a cardiothoracic surgical emergency. Therefore, it has absolutely nothing to do with me. Allie, please. Richard begged openly, weeping now, his tears practically audible through the cheap digital connection. I am not asking you to pay the massive hospital debt. I know we destroyed any right to ask you for a gift. I am just begging you to be a financial guarantor. Just co-sign a high-risk personal loan for me. Just put your name and your massive surgical income on a single piece of paper so the bank will give us $20,000. We just need enough cash to secure a deposit on a slightly safer apartment and buy some decent groceries. I will pay you back every single cent. I swear on my life, Allie. I am begging you as your father. Have some mercy on your own flesh and blood. I let his pathetic, desperate sobs hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. I looked over at Liam, who was watching me closely. He took a slow sip of his champagne, knowing exactly who was on the phone, without me having to say a single word. He did not intervene. He simply smiled, a dark, satisfied smile, waiting for me to deliver the final execution. I turned my gaze back to the mirror, locking eyes with my own reflection. I remembered the freezing winter night 6 years ago. I remembered standing on the grand, sweeping porch of their immaculate suburban estate, holding a single garbage bag containing my scrubs and my medical textbooks. I remembered the freezing wind cutting through my thin jacket as I begged them for a tiny fraction of my own stolen money, just to avoid starvation. Do you remember the last conversation we had on your beautiful, perfectly manicured front porch? Richard, I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper that sliced straight to the bone. Do you remember standing in the doorway of your warm, fully paid-off mansion while I stood shivering in the snow with absolutely nothing? Richard choked on a sob, unable to formulate a coherent response. He knew exactly what was coming. You looked me dead in the eyes and you told me to pack my garbage and get off your property. I recounted, articulating every single word with meticulous surgical precision. You told me I was an ugly, drug-addicted failure who would never amount to anything. And then you said the exact words that define this precise moment. You said failures do not deserve to stand in this family. Richard let out a loud, agonizing wail, realizing his own toxic, arrogant words had just become his permanent, inescapable death sentence. Allie, I was wrong, he cried out. I was so incredibly blind and wrong. Yes, you were, I agreed coldly. But you were the one who established the foundational rules of this family, Richard. And now you get to play by them. You failed financially. You failed morally. And you failed legally. You are a complete and total failure. And according to your very own strict philosophy, failures do not deserve a place in my life. Now play by your own rules and rot in the gutter you built for yourself. I did not wait for his screaming response. I did not want to hear another single pathetic syllable fall from his lying mouth. I lowered the phone from my ear. I looked at the screen, watching the active call timer ticking away. I firmly pressed the red circular icon, instantly severing the connection. The line went totally dead. Without missing a single beat, I navigated directly into the contact settings of my smartphone. I selected the unknown local number. I tapped the bold red text that read "Block this caller" and confirmed the permanent restriction. I completely, permanently, and ruthlessly severed the very last toxic root attempting to cling to my successful life. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt zero remorse. I felt nothing but pure, unadulterated, absolute freedom washing over my entire body. I set the smartphone face down on the marble table next to Liam. I turned back to the tall, elegant mirrors, taking a deep, satisfied breath. "Was that the hospital administration?" Liam asked smoothly, swirling the remaining champagne in his crystal flute. I smiled, looking at my gorgeous, powerful reflection. "No," I replied, my voice bright and entirely unburdened. "It was just a wrong number from a very desperate stranger. They will never call this line again." I signaled the seamstress to finish pinning the luxurious silk hem, entirely ready to step into the brilliant, flawless future I had built entirely with my own two hands. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton in downtown Chicago was a blinding display of absolute wealth and elite professional achievement. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of the most brilliant medical minds in the entire country. The air smelled of expensive perfume and fresh imported roses. I sat at the central table of honor, wearing the exact, flawless midnight blue silk gown I had been fitted for earlier that month. The fabric draped perfectly across my shoulders, projecting an image of absolute, untouchable success. Liam sat right beside me, wearing a razor-sharp bespoke black tuxedo. His hand rested warmly over mine, grounding me in the beautiful reality we had built entirely from the ground up. Meanwhile, on the exact opposite side of the city, a completely different reality was violently playing out. Inside a cramped, decaying one-bedroom apartment that smelled permanently of cheap bleach and rotting garbage, Brittany was throwing a massive, unhinged tantrum. She stood in the center of the stained living room carpet, wearing the same faded gray hospital sweatpants she had been discharged in. Her hair was a greasy, tangled mess, and her face was twisted into a mask of pure, selfish rage. "Give me the last $20, Susan." Brittany shrieked, her voice echoing harshly against the thin, cheap drywall. "I need to buy a prepaid data card right now. I have to check my social media accounts. I have to tell my followers that Malik stole all my money." Susan was sitting slumped on a broken thrift store sofa, clutching a heavily taped plastic wallet to her chest. She looked completely hollowed out, a pathetic shadow of the arrogant, wealthy woman she used to be. "I cannot give you that money, Brittany," Susan cried out, her voice cracking with absolute despair. "That is the only cash we have left for groceries this entire week. If I give you that $20, your father and I will literally starve for the next 4 days. We already owe the landlord late fees. We have absolutely nothing left to sell." Brittany aggressively snatched a cheap plastic cup off the counter and hurled it violently against the wall, shattering it into pieces. "I do not care if you starve," Brittany roared, stomping her foot like a petulant toddler. "You owe me this money. You let Allie walk away with all her millions. You failed to protect my company. You ruined my entire life, and now you want me to sit here in the dark without internet access. Give me the cash right now, or I will tear this miserable apartment to the ground." Richard sat slumped at the tiny, wobbly kitchen table, staring blankly at a massive stack of final collection notices from the hospital billing department. The bold red numbers printed on the invoices demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars they would absolutely never possess again. He did not intervene to stop his wife and his golden child from viciously tearing each other apart over a single $20 bill. He simply buried his face in his trembling hands, entirely trapped in the inescapable hell he had actively chosen to build. the harsh, suffocating reality of their miserable existence stood in stark, stunning contrast to the glowing, vibrant atmosphere of the ballroom. The president of the medical association smiled brightly, holding up a heavy crystal trophy that caught the light of the chandeliers. Tonight, we honor a physician who embodies the absolute pinnacle of medical excellence and unwavering personal resilience. The president announced, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. She is a woman who saves lives with unmatched precision and leads her surgical department with profound, inspiring integrity. It is my ultimate honor to present the National Cardiothoracic Surgeon of the Year Award to Dr. Allison Hayes. The entire grand ballroom erupted into a deafening roar of applause. Hundreds of highly respected surgeons, medical directors, and hospital administrators instantly rose to their feet. It was a massive, overwhelming standing ovation. The sound of their genuine respect washed over me, erasing every single echo of the vicious insults my biological parents had hurled at me 6 years ago. I stood up, smoothing the front of my midnight blue silk gown. Liam stood up right beside me. He did not let go of my hand. He looked down at me, his eyes shining with a deep, powerful pride that easily eclipsed any fake conditional approval my mother had ever offered her golden child. We walked toward the stage together, moving with absolute confidence. The applause only grew louder as we navigated through the sea of tables. Every single person in that room recognized my value. Every single person respected the empire I had built entirely on my own merits. I stepped up onto the stage, leaving Liam standing proudly in the front row. The association president handed me the heavy, flawless crystal award. I walked up to the microphone, looking out over the massive sea of distinguished professionals clapping and cheering for my success. I looked down at Liam, who was smiling the most beautiful, genuine smile I had ever seen. My heart was completely full. My life was absolutely perfect. The toxic anchors of my past had been permanently severed, and I was finally flying completely free. I leaned toward the microphone, the bright stage lights warming my face. I looked out at the colleagues who respected me and the husband who fiercely protected me. A calm, deeply satisfied smile spread across my face. I knew exactly what I needed to say to close the darkest chapter of my life forever. Family is not defined by the people who happen to share your blood, I stated, my voice projecting clearly and confidently across the silent, captivated room. Family is defined by the people who never cut your lifeline when you are desperately drowning. And as for the ones who maliciously pushed you into the freezing water, you simply step back and let them learn how to swim. The most profound lesson we can draw from this story is that biology does not automatically entitle anyone to your peace, your success, or your future. Society heavily conditions us to believe that we must endlessly forgive and accommodate our toxic family members simply because we happen to share the same genetic bloodline. However, true family is never defined by shared DNA. It is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the concrete actions people choose to take when you are standing at your absolute lowest point. When people show you exactly who they are and how little they truly value your well-being, you must believe them the very first time. You absolutely do not owe your hard-earned resources or your emotional labor to the same individuals who happily watched you drown in freezing water. Furthermore, this narrative powerfully illustrates that the absolute best revenge against those who maliciously try to break you is simply to build an incredibly successful, untouchable life completely without them. You do not need to seek active vengeance or lower yourself to their toxic level of manipulation. You only need to focus entirely on your own personal growth, your own career, and your own healing journey. Eventually, life has a remarkable, relentless way of delivering natural consequences to those who build their entire existence on foundations of lies, greed, and the ruthless exploitation of others. When their inevitable collapse finally happens, you have absolutely no obligation to serve as their financial or emotional rescue boat. Establishing firm, impenetrable boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You are completely allowed to cut off the necrotic ties of your painful past to protect the brilliant, flawless future you built with your own two hands. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your own peace and build the successful life you truly deserve? Share your inspiring story of resilience in the comments below, and do not forget to like and subscribe to join our community of strong survivors who bravely chose themselves.